Hey everybody, how are you? So, I'm sure that you've either seen or heard about the debate yesterday, and suffice to say, things did not go as well as I would have hoped. However, what's been bothering me all day is how the coverage around the debate last night has been focused almost entirely on Biden's errors and slip-ups, while maybe mentioning in passing, but mostly just ignoring the unbelievable flood of lies that was coming out of Donald Trump's mouth at every second of that debate. Every second. And that is just such a disservice to the American people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through that debate again with you right now. We're going to go through it line by line. And I'm going to point out to you every single lie that Trump tells. And I'm also going to be critiquing Biden's performance as well. But the reason why I'm doing this is because I've often found myself talking to people and they say to me, I understand Trump's a liar, I get it, yeah. No, you don't. You do not understand how much this man lies. It is not an exaggeration to say that every word, every single word out of his mouth is a deception of one kind or another. Every single word. And yesterday was Trump on one of his best nights in a long time. When he's giving a speech to his people, when he's around his friends, when he's not worried about looking normal for the normals, it's worse. But it's bad enough here to get the idea. And I've actually been wanting to do something like this for a while. I've wanted to take a segment of either Trump speaking or like a Hannity-type figure speaking and just point out the insane, non-stop stream of lies coming out of them. But I had intended to make that a relatively shorter section. On the other hand, I feel that this debate is so important, and this is just such a critical time that I'm going to have to expand that. Because somebody has to point this out. Somebody has to put this out there. Because otherwise people just aren't going to know. And I hope that you will stick around and you'll find this interesting. Because I know a lot of you have seen this debate already, right? I mean, do I really want to go through every goddamn line of it? So I'm going to try to keep it interesting. I'm going to try to keep it moving pretty quickly. But again, I think it's important. So I hope that you'll watch. Alright guys, let's start the show. See you again in a minute. Hey everybody, we're back. So as you can see in the last 30 seconds or so, a very convenient leprechaun came in and shrunk me down to this side and dropped me into the debate. No, I'm kidding. But in no less of a miracle, I figured out how to do this whole picture-in-picture thing. So I've got the debate up here. I went with the C-SPAN version because I figured that was going to be the one with the fewest bells and whistles, frills and spin, all that kind of thing. I'll be providing the spin for you. I've also sped up the video to play at 1.5 times speed because, again, I figure a lot of you have seen this stuff before, and frankly, with some of the slow speaking going on in this debate, it's not going to hurt. And I wanted to give more time for me to lace in the commentary in there. The debate started with the actual candidates talking at about an hour in, so that is where we are, and we're starting from there. Okay, let's go.
And please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump.
God, his face.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Let's begin the debate, and let's start with the issue that voters consistently say is their top concern, the economy. President Biden, inflation has slowed, but prices remain high. Since you took office, the price of essentials has increased. For example, a basket of groceries that cost $100 then now costs more than $120. And typical home prices have jumped more than 30%. What do you say to voters who feel they are worse off under your presidency than they were under President Trump?
We got to take a look at what I was left when I became president, what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach in your arm. You'll be all right. The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do is try to put things back together again. And that's exactly what we began to do. We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out...
Sorry, one mistake there. He means 15 million, not 15,000.
In a position where we have 800,000 manufacturing jobs, but there's more to be done. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I come from a household where the kitchen table, if things weren't able to be met during the month, was a problem. The price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of housing, the price of a whole range of things. That's why I'm working so hard to make sure I deal with those problems. And we're going to make sure that we reduce the price of housing. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. The combination that I was left with in corporate greed is the reason why we're in this problem right now. In addition to that, we're in a situation where if you take a look at all that was done in his administration, he didn't do much at all. By the time he left, things were in chaos, literally chaos. And so we put things back together. We created, I said, those jobs. We make sure we had a situation where we brought down the price of prescription drugs, which is a major issue for many people. To $15 for...
Oh, here's another one. He's about to say $15 for insulin. He actually means $35.
For an insulin shot as opposed to $400. No senior has to pay more than $200 for any drug, all the drugs they can include beginning next year. In a situation that we're going to make that available to everybody, to all Americans. So we're working to bring down the price around the kitchen table, and that's what we're going to get done.
Thank you, President Trump.
Okay, so I just want to comment on that a little bit. Biden's actually making very good points here, except for those small mistakes with the numbers. Again, everything he said here is correct. He has made significant strides economically recovering from the mess that was COVID, and I just did a big old video about this. And the fact is that the economy is in a good state right now. Unemployment is very low, lower than it's been in literally, I'm not going to say living memory, but pretty close. Certainly 50, 60 years. We have the highest level of wage growth in a similar time period. We're talking 50, 60 years. And inflation, which has been a problem, was also a problem all over the world, and we were the ones that actually came out of it the quickest and the most successfully, with the least amount of economic pain. We got out of the inflation situation without triggering a recession. We're still having solid growth. And in fact, for the first time in something like 50 years, our economic growth actually outpaced China's, which is something that remarkably few people talk about. So Biden's good on this. My problem is his voice. He sounds old. It's breathy, it's quiet, but on the points, it's all good. No real complaints here.
We have the greatest economy in the history of our country.
Just a lie. He just makes that up. There is literally no data backing that up in any degree, not on any point. Like, the only best in any area that was achieved under Trump was the lowest tax rate for billionaires and corporations ever. That is it.
We have never done so well. Everybody was amazed by it. Other countries were copying us. We got hit with COVID, and when we did, we spent the money necessary so we wouldn't end up in a Great Depression, the likes of which we had in 1929. By the time we finished, so we did a great job. We got a lot of credit for the economy, a lot of credit for the military.
By the time you finished? What? By the time you finished, we were in the worst of the COVID collapse. And as opposed to this respect and imitation thing from all over the world, it's nonsense. The fact is that the only leaders across the entirety of the earth who had anything good to say about Donald Trump were, frankly, Putin, Xi, Kim Jong-un, that whole crowd. Everyone, literally every leader of every allied nation laughed at this man. And it's on video. You can see it in the from all of these meetings and summits. It is very clear the opinion that our allies and frankly our enemies have of this man.
And no wars and so many other things. Everything
yeah, again, a lie. We were at war in Afghanistan.
was rocking good. But the thing we never got the credit for, and we should have, is getting us out of that COVID mess.
Again, what is he saying? Getting us out of the COVID mess? We were still in it. I was about to say something that's probably going to get me kicked off on YouTube or something, but let's just say we were eyeballs deep in the COVID mess. Trump did not get us out of COVID.
He created mandates. That was a disaster for our country, but...
So, with the mandates, Biden was not the only one that created them. It was the experts working at various of his agencies that were creating those mandates. And moreover, a lot of those mandates were not actually instituted by the federal government. They were instituted on the state level, which is why we have different reactions in different states. And a thing that bothers me repeatedly in all of this criticism about shutdowns and mandates and whatnot is that we don't really know what would have happened had we opened up earlier. That's a counterfactual. But what we can see is that in other countries that had fewer restrictions, more people died. We know that even today, in red districts and red states, more people died, though admittedly that was especially prevalent after the vaccine was introduced, because fewer people take the vaccine in red areas, largely because of stuff that this guy was saying. Moving on.
Other than that, we had given them back a country where the stock market actually was higher than pre-COVID, and nobody thought that was even possible. The only jobs he created are
Again, stock market under Biden is the highest it's ever been.
for illegal immigrants and bounce-back jobs, a bounce back from the COVID. He has not done a good job.
He is talking as though COVID ended while he was president. That is deranged. It's such a lie.
He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country. It is
Again, inflation dropped faster than any other advanced economy in the world under Biden.
absolutely killing us.
Thank you, President Biden.
Well, look, the greatest economy in the world. He's the only one who
Yeah.
thinks that, I think. I don't know anybody else who thinks that we have the greatest economy in the world. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that we find ourselves in a situation where his economy, he rewarded the wealthy. Yeah.
This is true. Trump's tax cuts, as I showed in my previous video on economics, only about 20% of the money that went to these large corporations and very rich people because of Trump's tax cuts, only about 20% of that actually went back to the American population. 60% went directly into the pockets of the richest people in the country.
He had the largest tax cut in American history, $2 trillion. He raised a deficit larger than any president has.
Also true, Trump raised the deficit higher than any other president. In fact, in his one term, he raised the total debt higher than any other president has managed to do in 2 full terms.
In any one term. He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began. Since
Also
Herbert Hoover.
true.
The idea that he did something that was significant in the military. You know, when he was president, they were still killing people in Afghanistan. He didn't do anything about
Yep,
that.
I said
When he
that
was
already.
president, we were still finding ourselves in a position where you had a notion that we were this safe country. The truth is, I'm the only president this century that doesn't have this decade, that doesn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world.
So this is actually a really good point. It's amazing the amount of just total reality denial that the right's been able to pull off. They have managed to create this impression that Biden is the one getting us into wars, whereas in fact, we are not actually at war right now. Despite what everyone is saying, we are at war neither in Ukraine, nor are we in war in Israel or Gaza. We're helping, but we're not fighting there. No, those are the Ukrainians and the Israelis and the Palestinians that are dying.
World, like he did.
President Trump, I want to follow up if I can.
Am I allowed to respond to him?
Well, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. You can do whatever you want with the minute that we give you. I want to follow up. You want to impose a 10% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. How will you ensure that that doesn't drive prices even higher?
Not going to drive them higher. It's just going to cost countries that have been ripping.
Like, it's hard to deal with a guy like this, because a 10% tariff on all goods means that you are raising the cost of the good by 10%. That is what a tariff is. That's how it works. You pay 10% more. And then he's saying that that's not going to raise prices. Like, what?
Us off for years, like China and many others, in all fairness to China, is going to just force them to pay us a lot of money, reduce our deficit.
No, that is not how tariffs work. China doesn't pay us anything. We pay tariffs. That's how it works. It's a tax when you buy it as the consumer.
Deficit tremendously and give us a lot of power for other things. But he made a statement. The only thing he was right about is I gave you the largest tax cut in history. I also gave you the largest regulation cut in history. That's why we had all the jobs. And the jobs went down and then they bounced back, and he's taking credit for bounce back jobs.
Again, no. Trump did nothing to stimulate job growth. The fact is, if the job growth was associated with all of those tax cuts, we would have seen it years earlier. And again, in my economics video, I show that there is really no correlation between cutting taxes for these uber wealthy people and more jobs, because what they do, instead of using that money to invest in actual growth and creating new jobs, they just put it right back into their own pockets with stock buybacks. If you want to create jobs, you have to invest. You have to create incentives, which is exactly what Biden was doing in the Inflation Reduction Act.
You can't do that. He also said,
And also in the Chips and Sciences Act.
he inherited 9% inflation. No, he inherited almost no inflation, and it stayed that way for 14 months. And then it blew up under his leadership because they spent money like a bunch of people that didn't know what they would.
So what he's referring to, there was not 9% inflation. Actually, Biden didn't say that. He said 15% unemployment, if I remember correctly. So the inflation under Trump, let's actually take a look. We can check that right now. U.S. inflation over time. There we go. Let's take a look. Yeah, does not surprise me. Very, very low inflation over here. But let's not forget that at this time we were, as it says conveniently right here, right in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The economy was collapsing. So of course you were going to have very low, or actually I'm surprised we didn't even get into deflation, considering how bad things were.
Were doing, and they don't know what they were doing. It was the worst, probably the worst administration in history. There's never been.
Nonsense, just nonsense.
And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, I was getting out of Afghanistan, but we were getting out with dignity, with strength.
Another one that drives me crazy, getting out with dignity and strength. Trump's handling of the Afghanistan situation, the more I looked into it, the more shocked I became. He did not actually negotiate with the government of Afghanistan at all. At all. He went directly to the Taliban, because again, Trump always has an easier time when he's talking to, people he can understand, people he can get along with, psychopaths, mass murderers, terrorist organizations, that kind of thing. And that was the deal he made, purely with the Taliban, that we were just going to leave, drop everything and run, basically.
With power, he got out. It was the most embarrassing day in the history of our country's...
No, it wasn't the most embarrassing day in the history of the country. That was, I would say, January 6th is a good argument for that spot, but I will also admit that the handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan was not great. However, I really do wonder what the alternatives were, because since Trump had already removed the majority of our forces, what option would we have had? Because in order to fight off the Taliban, we would have had to have surged more troops into the area and kind of revitalized that war instead of toning it down. Now, could they have handled the withdrawal better? I'm sure they could have. Could they have done it without bringing in more troops and dedicating more force and escalating the situation? They probably could have done some things better, but I'm not sure how many things they could have done.
life.
President Trump, over the last 8 years, under both of your administrations, the national debt soared to record highs. And according to a new nonpartisan analysis, President Trump, your administration approved $8.4 trillion in new debt, while so far, President Biden, you've approved $4.3 trillion in new debt. So former President Trump, many of the tax cuts that you signed into law are set to expire next year. You want to extend them and go even further, you say. With the U.S. facing trillion-dollar deficits and record debt, why should top earners and corporations pay even less in taxes than they do now?
Because the tax cuts spurred the greatest economy that we've ever seen just prior to COVID.
That's a lie. Again, by no measure, by no data point is that in any way true at all.
And even after COVID, it was so strong that we were able to get through COVID much better than just about any other country. But we spurred, that tax spurred. Now, when we cut the taxes, as an example, the corporate tax was cut down to 21% from 39%, plus beyond that, we took in more revenue with much less tax.
A lie. We did not take in more revenue.
And companies were bringing back trillions of dollars back into our country. The country...
These companies, what they were doing was shoving money back into their own pockets. They were doing the largest round of stock buybacks that we have ever seen. And that, by the way, was part of the things that led to inflation, the vast rise of corporate profits. In fact, during this time period of the last couple of years that we've seen this high record inflation, we've also had record profits from these corporations. They took advantage of the situation. Had they just kept their profits at the record levels that they already were at, then we wouldn't have had any of this inflation that we've been experiencing.
Was going like never before, and we were ready to start paying down debt. We were ready to start using the liquid gold right under our feet.
Nonsense. Like, paying down? No, you were not ready to start paying down debt. It's nonsense. He raised the debt more than any other president in history. And as for liquid gold, he's talking about oil. You know when we've had the highest level of oil production ever in the history of not only the United States, but any country, anywhere, ever? It's right now under Joe Biden.
Oil and gas right under our feet. We were going to have something that nobody else has had. We got hit with COVID. We did a lot to fix it. I gave him an unbelievable situation with all of the therapeutics and all of the things that we came.
The one thing I will give Trump credit on is that he did do that warp speed vaccine creation project. Again, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and when you have a massive pandemic, you're supposed to work for a vaccine. Now, if only he hadn't screwed that whole thing up by then convincing his followers that the vaccine had, I don't know, nanobots from Bill Gates or whatever the hell else it is.
Came up with, we gave him something great. Remember, more people died under his administration.
So here's another point. That one is actually true. Around 400,000 people died under Trump's administration, and about another 600,000 and change under Biden. Couple of points. Firstly is that all of those deaths under Trump occurred within the period of a year. And secondly, it was essentially bound to happen that there were going to be more deaths under Biden's term, not only because there's more time, not only because COVID is an endemic disease now that's going to be in the population basically forever at one degree or another, but secondly because Trump dropped the peak of this catastrophe directly in Biden's lap. And it took time to get the vaccine rollout going. It took time to fully set up our response properly because it had not been that way before. It took time for guidelines to be properly set up and carried out. And that was that kind of most devastating period that Trump essentially dropped into our laps. However, again, at the end of the day, it was Biden who got us out of it, not Trump.
Even though we had largely fixed it, more people
They hadn't largely fixed it. The peak of the deaths were happening.
died under his administration than our administration, and we were right in the middle of it, something which a lot of people don't like to talk about. But he had far more people dying in his administration. He did the mandate, which is a disaster, mandating it. The vaccine went out. He did a mandate on the vaccine, which is the thing that people most object.
So, the vaccine, and I have looked into this repeatedly because I have had a lot of arguments with this about this with people. Pardon me. Don't worry, I don't have dementia. The vaccine is just a miracle, okay? The speed at which it was developed, though thankfully there was already a lot of research being done in that field before COVID ever came around, but also the speed at which it was distributed, and the amount of lives saved is just mind-boggling. Because the fact is that regardless of what any of these people say, the vaccine works, and it works extremely well. It prevents illness, it prevents severe illness, it prevents death, and it prevents transmission. And all of those at up to 90% reduction in chance. So it's not going to make sure that nobody gets sick, or that nobody dies. But if you would have gotten sick, you're now going to get not sick at all. If you would have gotten very sick, you're only going to get somewhat sick. And if you would have died, maybe you only get, again, somewhat sick. But the incidence of all of these things is reduced by 90% or more across the population. And that is a tremendous deal.
To do about the vaccine, and he did a very poor job, just a very poor job. And I will tell you,
Nonsense. Biden was extremely effective in getting the vaccine out to people. Again, it is just, I'm not going to say miraculous, but as close to miraculous as you can possibly be in the real world, that so many people got this vaccine so fast. And it saved just unimaginable amounts of lives.
not only poor there, but throughout the entire world, we're no longer respected as a country. They don't respect our
Again, the whole world does not respect this idiot.
leadership. They don't respect the United States anymore. We're like a third world nation between.
You know, it's kind of weird, again, that he's saying that nobody respects the United States now, because it's now that actually we've gotten the world to unite. Biden, what he's done in getting the European nations to actually get their backsides in gear in regards to dealing with Russia. Frankly, he's been more effective at getting our allies to do the things that they have to do than he has been at getting our own Congress to do the things it needs to do. Though, thankfully, that's because our allies aren't lunatics like the MAGA Congress.
Weaponization of his election, trying to go after his political opponent.
Again, another just load of nonsense. Biden has been pristine in his handling of Trump's trials. In fact, I think that the Merrick Garland Justice Department has been remarkably lenient and friendly towards this guy. Merrick Garland has taken every opportunity, essentially, to not go after Trump, to not go after Republicans, because he's of the type of guy who's of this mindset that he wants to just put all of this behind him, get it all over with. These, it's this same kind of thinking that led to the pardon of Richard Nixon, which, frankly, I think it was a mistake then. And I think that waiting so long to prosecute Trump now was also a mistake. But this idea that it's weaponization is just nonsense. The fact is that right now, the Justice Department is prosecuting more Democrats than they are Republicans. And then, again, that's because they know that the Democrats aren't going to throw up a fuss and act like it's crazy and say it's a witch hunt or anything like that, whereas the Republicans will. And they are bowing to that pressure, which I think is very much wrong. But it's the opposite of any kind of weaponization against Trump.
All of the things he's done, we've become like a third world nation.
Third world nation! This goddamn... Okay, gotta keep the cursing to a minimum. So, America has, again, the largest economy in the world. We are the most advanced economy in the world. We have the strongest military in the world. We have had the best recovery from COVID in the world. All of this nonsense that these people are saying, and it's not just Trump, it's a lot of the MAGA crowd and their supporters abroad and their fellow propagandists abroad, who are trying to make America look like a failing country. And it's not. The fact is, America is still the strongest country in the world, with all of our problems. And, it's amazing that no one calls them out on constantly just taking a massive dump on this country. And they're supposed to be on the right, they call themselves patriots. It's nonsense. They hate this country. And they're very clear in describing it this way.
Nation, and it's a shame. The damage he's done to our country, and I'd love to ask him, and will, why he allowed millions of people to come in here from prisons, jails, and mental institutions to come into our country.
He just makes shit up. He just makes stuff up. These people who are coming into this country are not from jails, they are not from mental institutions or anything like this. I've been looking into the stories of some of these people and why they come here. They come here because they're desperate. And they have no choice. There was one particular story of a woman who was trying to come to this country because her daughter had leukemia, and she simply could not get any treatment in Venezuela, because of course you can't. It's a country that's been under dictatorship for decades and is just in an absolute mess right now, and these people just want to live.
And destroy our country.
President Trump, we will get to immigration later in this block. President Biden, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this question about the national debt.
He had the largest national debt of any president in a 4-year period, number one. Number two, that $2 trillion tax cut benefited the very wealthy.
Yep.
What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they...
By the way, notice how he corrects himself when he makes a mistake. Not always, but he catches himself. You will never, ever, ever see Trump doing this.
Back pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 million, billion dollars, I should say, in a 10-year period.
If anything, it would probably be more than that.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
So this response started off well, and it trailed off into arguably, I would say, the worst moment of the debate, because he very clearly lost his train of thought right there. And he just kind of got back in with, "We beat Medicare." And that's the only thing that anyone's going to remember from this debate, unfortunately. Which sucks. But everything he was saying before then was good. Though, this was a bad look right here.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
Again, nonsense. Trump, in his administration, every single year was trying to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, every single time.
Because all of these people are coming in. They're putting them on Medicare. They're putting them on...
A lie. Illegal immigrants are not eligible for any of these programs. There are some on a more state/local level, but they are not they're not citizens, for God's sakes. In fact, by all measures, they put in more into the system than they take out from any services that they do receive. Like, for example, if you walk into an emergency room, they're still going to take care of you, whether you're legal, illegal, insured, non-insured, whatever. But in total, because these people work, and because payroll tax is still paid on them, even though, again, they receive none of the benefits from Social Security, they put more into the system than they take out.
on Social Security. They're going to destroy Social
No, they're not on Social Security.
Security. This man is going to single-handedly destroy Social Security.
He's making that up.
These millions and millions of people coming in, they're trying to put them on Social Security.
He's making that up.
He will wipe out Social Security. He will wipe out
He's
Medicare.
making that up.
So he was right in the way he finished that sentence, and it's a shame. What's happened to our country in the last 4 years is not to be believed. Foreign countries,
Yeah, it's not to be believed because you're making it up, you twit.
I'm friends with a lot of people. They
Putin, Xi, Un. We know the crowd.
cannot believe what happened to the United States of America. We're no longer respected. They don't like us. We give them everything.
What they cannot believe, at least in the democratic world, is that this is happening again.
They want, and they think we're stupid. They think we're very stupid
Yes, they think we are very stupid.
people. What we're doing for other countries, and they do nothing for us. What this man has done is absolutely...
So, what he just said, they do nothing for us. This is so dangerous. The degree to which we rely upon our allies, and this is the thing, this guy has just no clue of how international relations actually works. He has no clue of how NATO actually works. He has no idea of how intelligence gathering actually works, or any of these things. And so many people buy it. They think that our allies are, just leeches sitting on our necks. No! Aside from the fact that we do massive trade with these people, well, with Europe, with the Western democracies, and not just them, all over the world, our allies, with South Korea, with Taiwan, we have all these such important relationships, and right now those relationships are showing their value in a multitude of different ways. Let's just start with the international security situation. Our allies are really, really carrying a lot of weight with the Ukraine war. In fact, right now, I believe that their total contributions outweigh ours, and that's considering the much, much smaller sizes of their economies, because they understand how big a threat this is. And, they're right there on Russia's doorstep, a lot of them. So they are absolutely contributing and they are helping us, but not just in that way. They're also helping us in regards to intelligence, which is incredibly important. One of the things you can see actually is that dictatorships are not that great at internal security. They're very good at repression and they're very good at control, but they're not great at keeping out external threats, like, for example, the multiple terrorist attacks that we've seen inside of Russia recently. And one of the reasons why we in the US have not been having problems like this in a long while is that we work with our allies. We share intelligence with our allies. We need them, they need us, and that's why this works. Are there areas where they should do more? Absolutely. Are there areas where we could do more? Absolutely. But to throw away our friends in the world when we have so many and such strong enemies is insane. And that's what this guy wants to do.
Big criminal.
Thank you, President Trump. Dana?
This is the first presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. This morning, the court ruled on yet another abortion case, temporarily allowing emergency abortions to continue in Idaho, despite that state's restrictive ban. Former President Trump, you take credit for the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which returned the issue of abortion to the states.
Correct.
However, the federal government still plays a role in whether or not women have access to abortion pills. They're used in about 2/3 of all abortions. As president, would you block abortion medication?
First of all, the Supreme Court just approved the abortion bill.
That's half and half. So the Supreme Court did not approve the abortion pill, but they also didn't ban it yet. However, it's a very, very temporary victory at best, because what we've got is them not taking the case due to issues of standing. They didn't actually say that, we disagree and the abortion pill should be legal. That is not what they said. What they said is that we can't take the case because the plaintiff here, your client, can't prove that they were injured by the abortion pill in any way. The case was brought by a series of doctors who are basically just ideologues who say, one day we might have a patient who has a botched abortion and we would suffer from having to, look at her or something? It was ridiculous, an imaginary, non-existent patient, and the court just dumped it because it was so stupid and they had no standing.
And I agree with their decision to have done that, and I will not block it. And if you look at the...
Again, we can't trust anything he says in that situation because Republicans, literally everywhere that they have and when they have power, they have passed more and more and more restrictive regulations.
This whole question that you're asking, complex, but not really complex. 51 years ago, you had Roe v. Wade, and everybody wanted to get it back to the states. Everybody.
That's a lie. Does anyone really believe this? Does anyone believe that everyone wanted Roe v. Wade to be overturned? Everyone? Really?
Without exception. Democrats, Republicans,
Democrats wanted Roe v. Wade to be overturned. That's what he's saying. That is what he's saying.
Everybody wanted it back. Religious leaders. And what I did is I put 3 great Supreme Court justices on the court, and they happened to vote in favor of killing Roe v. Wade and moving it back to the states.
Despite the fact that many of these justices made promises that they would respect precedent and not overturn Roe v. Wade.
This is something that everybody wanted.
Everybody wanted, I'm sorry, have you been alive any time in the last 2 years when this has become I'm not going to say the most important issue, but top 3 in the country for sure? That's just overturning politics in multiple states where we have Democratic candidates overperforming their poll numbers by something like 10 points in almost every single election since Roe, and now he is telling us that Democrats are okay with Roe being overturned. Okay.
Now, 10 years ago or so, they started talking about how many weeks and how many this and getting into other things, but
What? No. People have been talking about abortion for a long time, much longer than 10
legal
years.
scholar throughout the world, the most respected.
Yes, throughout the world, every single legal scholar wanted abortion gone. Who is... I'm not going to say who is stupid enough to believe this, because a lot of people do.
Wanted it brought back to the states. I did that. Now the states are working it out. If you look at Ohio, it was a decision that was...
So working it out is a curious turn of phrase. This has created a legal, social, moral, ethical, medical catastrophe across the country. We are having literally thousands and tens of thousands of women giving birth to babies that they were raped to conceive, or having babies born who die in agony immediately after their births. In Texas alone, the rate of infant mortality jumped up by 13%. 13%, for God's sakes. The horrors that have come in the wake of the loss of Roe. Children, prepubescent girls, being forced to carry their rapists' babies. We have women dying of sepsis, unable to access medical care. We have women who sometimes are pregnant with twins, and because one has a complication and they can't get an abortion, the other one dies and she loses her fertility, so she can never have any more children. The unspeakable, mind-numbing human tragedy that has come from this is beyond comprehension.
It was an end result. It was a little bit more liberal than you would have thought. Kansas, I would say the same thing. Texas.
So yeah, in every single state where there has been a vote of the people, a ballot measure or something like that, in every single instance where the people have been allowed to express their will, including in the deepest red of states, they have chosen to select to, expand or keep abortion rights. Because at some point, you bump into reality, and you see how horrible this actually is, and thankfully that makes people come to their senses.
Texas is different, Florida is different, but they're all making their own decisions right now, and right now the states control it. That's the vote of the people. Like Ronald Reagan, I believe in the exceptions. I am a person that believes, and frankly...
So, about Ronald Reagan. Actually, Ronald Reagan was one of the first people to legalize abortion in this country, back when he was governor of California, way back when, which most people forget. In fact, the Republican Party actually used to be fine with abortion until literally the early 80s. And as to these exceptions, the fact is, people, that exceptions simply do not work. What we've been having are exceptions on paper that in practice end up being bans. And this is something that literally everyone in the medical community was saying, and I have some medical experience, and it was obvious to me that this was going to happen. And you can tell just by how the laws are written, because, just think about it a little bit. Let's say you have a law that says something, as many of them do, that the abortion must be banned past such and such weeks, unless the life of the mother is at risk. How much risk? 30%, 10%, 50%, 70%? How do you is there a perfect way to measure that? No, of course not. And the problem is that, let's say you have a doctor there who's looking at her and she says, okay, now she's got a 50% chance of dying, and the other guy says, maybe it's a 40% chance, and we're not quite there yet. And if they get it wrong, in certain states they can go to jail for life, these physicians, and anyone involved in the process in any way, up to and including the Uber driver who drove her to the hospital or anything like this in some states. And what ends up happening is that these doctors are terrified, and they just don't act. And in the meantime, these women are suffering in unimaginable distress. Literally dying, bleeding all over the place. I watched a podcast recently that was an interview with this man who had to watch his wife going through this, and I can't imagine the helplessness and the panic of watching your wife, the mother of your children, bleeding to death in front of you, and you can't do a damn thing. The doctors can't even do a damn thing. It's unbelievable.
I think it's important to believe in the exceptions. Some people, you have to follow your heart. Some people don't believe in that.
If it was up to people following their heart, that's what they could do under Roe. If you don't want abortion, don't get it. Believe everyone else alone.
But I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I think it's very important.
Again, these do not work in practice. I talked about life of the mother just recently, but the rape, the amount of hoops that these women have to go through to prove that they were raped in order to get that exception is mind-boggling. They have to file a report, they have to produce some evidence. I think the rules vary state by state, but still, it is difficult. And frankly, when one is a survivor of rape, I've looked into some of this, and it's so sad the way that people let their assumptions about how a woman should or would react in a traumatic circumstance like this to override the reality of what actually happens. Because so many times there are things that get in the way of her being able to make a report. There's shame, there's fear, there's disgust. There might even be love involved, because what if this is a person who she's in love with, who she thought was a decent person? What if it's a family member? What if it's someone who else is in a position of power or what have you over her? Just, life is messy and complicated and hard sometimes, and we are making it unnecessarily harder for the most vulnerable people.
People don't follow your heart, but you have to get elected also, and because that has to do with other things. You got to get elected. The problem they have is they're radical, because they will take the life of a child in the 8th month, the 9th month, and even after birth.
He's just lying. It's nonsense. Just please understand that an abortion after birth it's a murder. And doctors are not running around murdering babies. It's so stupid. And even, women are not waiting until they're 8 months pregnant going, well, guess I don't want this thing. That doesn't happen. Even in states where abortion is allowed up until birth, I tried to find cases of women getting such late-term abortions, and I just couldn't. I could not find any one single instance of a woman willy-nilly just getting rid of a baby at some late stage in pregnancy for no reason. And frankly, what a monster do you have to be to believe people would do that? But secondly, there's a lot of practical reasons for this to happen. Firstly, doctors aren't going to do it. And secondly, at that stage, the process of removing a baby, it's already fairly, and a lot of times they basically have to go through the birthing procedure. And, they have to pass it vaginally. And in every instance where I've been able to find a record of a woman having an abortion at that late stage, it's because of something horrible. Just some horrible, horrible complication or unexpected health discovery, something like this, or she wasn't able to get it earlier and there has already been some sort of health thing discovered. It's every one of these stories is just so sad. And it is absolutely not what Republicans keep telling us, just this willy-nilly murder of children. Because, for most people, the death of a child, it has an emotional impact. It's only MAGA Republicans who don't care at all when kids are gunned down in all these mass shootings. But they think everyone is like them, so they assume we're all psychopaths.
Birth. If you look at the former governor of Virginia, he was willing to do this. He said, we'll put the baby aside and we'll determine what we do with the baby, meaning we'll kill the baby.
No one's killing babies.
What happened is we brought it back to the states, and the country is now coming together on this issue.
Yeah, as we all know, abortion is the issue that's bringing us all together right now.
It's been a great thing.
Thank you. President Biden?
It's been a terrible thing, what you've done. The fact is that the vast majority of constitutional scholars supported Roe when it was decided. Supported Roe. And that's this idea that they're all against it is just ridiculous.
I don't know if it's the vast majority, but it was relatively broadly accepted, frankly.
And this is the guy who says the state should be able to have it. We're in a state where in 6 weeks, you don't even know whether you're pregnant or not, but you cannot see a doctor and have your...
Yeah, that's true. A lot of times at 6 weeks, a woman doesn't know if she's pregnant. Look, let's think about it. Period on average every 4 weeks to a month, right? And how often is it that women are late? All the time. So how's she going to know if it's 6 weeks and she's pregnant, or it's just one of those times?
And have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are...
Exactly, people who are not the woman and her doctor should not be involved in this decision.
able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states.
Yeah.
Let each state have a different rule.
Yeah.
Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by
So this is another bad spot in the debate. He was talking about abortion and doing all right, and then he veered into this immigration thing. And what I think was going on is that he was probably anticipating that Trump's going to go into immigration, and then he started thinking around that line. But that was him clearly losing his spot. I don't believe that this was intentional on his part. It was a gaffe, and it does not look good.
An immigrant coming in, they talk about that. But here's the deal.
So in general, he's talking about the whole, it's probably Laken Riley, it might be one of the other ones. This is something that all of the Republicans have been talking about a lot. They've been demonizing immigrants, and yes, there are situations where someone comes into this country illegally and does something horrible while they're here. It happens. However, that is not an excuse to demonize millions of people. Because the fact is that all data that we have show that immigrants, including illegal immigrants, are less likely to commit crimes than the native-born population. Again, including illegal immigrants, they are less likely to commit crime than the rest of the population. And who is that coming from? Not your liberals or New York or anything like that. From the freaking Texas State Police, who are some of the few groups who make very specifically distinctions between crime that is non-immigrant, immigrant, illegal immigrant related. They carry all that data, and that's coming from them. And as you all know, the Texas State Police is a bastion of woke ideology, right?
There's a lot of young women to be raped by their in-laws, by.
So again, I just want to reinforce that it is disappointing to see that Biden veered off into immigration at this point. However, as I was saying before, you cannot demonize an entire group of people because of the actions of a few. Because if we did that, there are plenty of white, native-born Americans who do horrible, horrible things. And by no means should we punish all of them because of the actions of a few.
By their spouses, brothers and sisters. It's just ridiculous. And they can do nothing about it. And they try to arrest them when they cross state line.
Thank you.
There have been many young women murdered by the same people he allows to come across our border. We have a border that's the most dangerous place anywhere in the world.
Yeah, okay. Tell that to a trooper in Ukraine on those fields, okay? Because you cannot stick your head out for 30 seconds without a drone coming to kill you. That's arguably the most dangerous place on Earth. If not, visit Gaza. But the border? No, it's not even close.
Considered the most dangerous place anywhere in the world.
He's just making this up.
And he opened it up, and these killers are coming into our...
They're not killers, they're people. The vast majority of them are fleeing poverty and violence, which is just sad. And when they come here, all they want to do is get a job, take care of their families, maybe send some money home if they can. They're decent people, and they're desperate, and we should not be treating them like this.
our country, and they are raping and killing women.
No, they're not.
And it's a terrible thing. As far as the abortion is concerned, it is now back with the states. The states are voting. In many cases, it's frankly a very liberal decision. In many cases, it's the opposite. But they're voting, and it's bringing it back to the vote of the people, which is what everybody wanted,
No!
including the founders, if they knew about this.
I mean, he really leaves me speechless somehow. Like, the founders don't want abortion. Like, how the hell does he know?
This issue, which frankly they didn't. But they would have. Everybody wanted it brought back. Ronald Reagan wanted it brought back. He wasn't able to get it. Everybody wanted it brought back, and many presidents had tried to get it back. I was the one to do it. And again, this gives it the vote of the people, and that's where they wanted it. Every legal scholar wanted it that way.
No,
Staying on the
it's
topic
just
of
a
abortion,
lie.
President Biden, 7 states. I'll let you do that. This is the same topic. 7 states have no legal restrictions on how far into a pregnancy a woman can obtain an abortion. Do you support any legal limits on how late a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy?
I supported Roe v. Wade, which had 3 trimesters. First time is between the woman and the doctor. Second time is between the doctor and an extreme situation. The third time is between the doctor, between the woman and the state.
So, it's not a bad answer. It's, again, not the answer I would have given, which I just did. I think it really stands to mention that these kind of late terms and certainly post-birth abortion, it's not a thing.
The idea that the politicians, the founders wanted the politicians to be the ones making decisions about women's health is ridiculous. That's the last. No politician should be making that decision. A doctor should be making that decision. That's how it should be run. That's what you're going to do. And if I'm elected, I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade.
I certainly
You
hope
can
so.
take the life of the baby in the 9th month and even after birth,
He's
because
making
some
shit
states,
up.
Democrat run, take it after birth. Again, the
He's
former
lying.
governor of Virginia, put the baby down, then we decide what to do with it. So he's
lying.
willing to, as we say, rip the baby out of the womb in the 9th month
Again,
and kill
he's
the baby.
lying. He's
Nobody
lying.
wants that to happen, Democrat or Republican. Nobody wants it to
Well, yeah, nobody wants people to kill babies, but he's lying that it happens.
That is simply not true.
There you go.
That Roe v. Wade does not provide for that. That's not the circumstance. Only if a woman's life is in danger, she's going to die. That's the only circumstance in which that can happen. But we are not for late-term abortion, period. Period, period.
Under Roe v. Wade, you have late-term abortion. You can do whatever you want.
It's a
Depending
lie.
on the state, you can do whatever you want. We don't think that's a good thing. We think it's a radical thing. We think the Democrats are the radicals, not the Republicans.
For 51 years, that was the law. 51 years, constitutional scholarship said it was the right way to go. 51 years, and it was taken away because this guy put very conservative members on the Supreme Court. He takes credit for taking it away. What's he going to do? What's he going to do, in fact, if the MAGA Republicans, he gets elected, and the MAGA Republicans control the Congress, and they pass a universal ban on abortion, period, across the
gonna
board,
sign it.
in 6 weeks or 7 or 8 or 10 weeks, something very, very conservative. Was he going to sign that bill? I'll veto it. He'll sign it.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the issue of immigration and border security. President Biden, a record number of migrants have illegally crossed the southern border on your watch, overwhelming border states and overburdening cities such as New York and Chicago, and in some cases causing real safety and security concerns. Given that, why should voters trust you to solve this crisis?
Because we worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. Significantly, by the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
So, a couple of points on this. Biden's points are broadly good. We do need more asylum officers. We need comprehensive border reform and immigration reform in general. And this is something that we've been trying to do for a long time. And every time we try, the MAGA Republicans have been blocking it. It is also true that in the last couple of weeks, we've had something like a 40% decrease in migrant encounters because of the executive order that Biden passed just recently. Now, I wish he would just deliver this with more force, more confidence. You know, I know this is playing sped up a little bit, but even in regular speed, when I was watching this, he sounded like he was going quickly. He sounded breathy, but the points are more or less decent.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided.
So, this safest border nonsense, let's not forget that at the end of Trump's term, we were in the middle of the COVID lockdown. Not just us, but the entire world. That is the main reason why the border situation was stable. Now, during Trump's term, yes, fewer people were getting through. But he was doing that by essentially creating a mind-boggling humanitarian crisis. That whole thing that Biden was saying about children being separated from their parents, that is absolutely true. And it is... it's... the imagery coming out of some of that was really, really horrifying. And moreover, Trump did nothing during his term to actually solve the root of the problem, which is that our immigration system is overloaded. It takes people, 10, 15 years sometimes to get to this country the legal way, if they're lucky. And it's so difficult that a lot of people, in their desperation, come here the wrong way. And again, as long as these people are desperate, and as long as America is a good place to live, which who knows, maybe Trump will change that, people are going to try to come here. And that is such a strength of this country. Like, there are countries that would kill for this kind of immigration that we get. People are trying to come here, trying to become Americans, trying to join our system, instead of, for example, the Chinese communist system, which could be another option for them, who knows. Like, they deliver so much. They are a huge source of growth in the economy. Again, one of the reasons why we've had such robust growth as we're coming out of the recovery has been because of these people coming in and contributing. But it just in general, we all know that that these immigrants are responsible for a lot of the food that we eat, for a lot of the, even the houses that we live in and construction, all of these things. They contribute so much, and the way that they're being demonized is just ridiculous.
To open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons, people that
He's
are from
making shit
mental
up.
institutions, insane asylum, terrorists. We have the largest number of
Nonsense.
terrorists coming into our country right now. All
Nonsense.
terrorists, all over
Purely
the world, not just in
made
South
up.
America, all over the world. They come
Purely
from the
made
Middle East,
up.
everywhere, all over the world. They're pouring in, and this guy.
The number one terrorist threat currently facing the United States, as assessed by the FBI, is radical white nationalist extremism.
Just left it open, and he didn't need legislation because I didn't have legislation.
Yeah, you didn't have legislation. You gotta keep the cursing to a minimum. Okay, so yeah, you really do need legislation to fix this. The only way you could fix it without legislation is by assuming dictatorial powers, which, again, is his plan.
I said, close the border. We had the safest border in history. In that final couple of months of my presidency, we had, according to Border Patrol, who is great, and by the way, who endorsed me for president, but I won't say that, but they endorsed me.
Let's see that. That one I want to confirm. Let's see. Okay. So, oh, this is a good point. So it looks like the Border Patrol... you see, I had remembered something about the Border Patrol's endorsement, but I did not recall... I actually hadn't heard that they had endorsed anybody, but I did remember this, that they endorsed the border bill, but they did not endorse Biden. Let's see, did they endorse anyone? I'll just quickly... Why can't I back out? I don't think they endorsed anyone. True. Yeah, so they haven't endorsed anyone. Biden, I think he probably mistook that, he just forgot. And... yeah, that was a mistake on his behalf. Again, I assume he was talking that they endorsed his plan, but that was a bad moment for him. But again, Trump is also lying.
For president. Brandon, just speak to him. But look, we had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it. And people are dying all over the place,
He's making it up.
including the people that are coming up in
Thank you, President
caravans.
Trump. President Biden?
The only terrorist who's done anything across the border is one who came along and killed three, under his administration, killed an Al-Qaeda person come in his administration, killed three American soldiers. That's the only terrorist that's there. I'm not saying that no terrorist ever got through, but the idea they're emptying their prisons, we're welcoming these people, that's simply not true. There's no data to support what he said. Once again, he's exaggerating, he's lying.
President Trump, staying on the topic of immigration, you've said that you're going to carry out, quote, the largest domestic deportation operation in American history, unquote. Does that mean that you will deport every undocumented immigrant in America, including those who have jobs, including those whose spouses are citizens, and including those who have lived here for decades? And if so, how will you do it?
Just 1 second. He said we killed 3 people. The people we killed are al-Baghdadi.
So what they're referring to here is there was an incident a couple of years ago, again, this is another one that I remember only vaguely, where a handful, it's actually extremely rare for terrorists to come through the southern border. Let me, again, I always like to double check. Let's see, what was that instance? Let's see. Okay. So I cannot find that specific instance that Biden is referring to. I remember there was something, but I do want to find it. Let me just think about my search terms. I gotta say, recently, Google search has not been making me particularly happy, but let's see if I can find out what's going on here. Actually, let me pause. Sorry, everyone, bit of a technical issue here. It looks like in this case, Biden was actually wrong. Well, everyone was wrong, because I can't find record of any terrorist who actually committed an attack coming in from the southern border. I believe that what Biden is referring to is to the attack that happened in that naval station a few years ago in 2019, but that was actually someone who came in from Saudi Arabia who was actually in a joint training exercise, apparently, with the U.S. when he decided to shoot up some of our troops. He was a radical lunatic, but he did not cross from the southern border. In fact, I can't find record, again, of any terrorists who actually did an attack coming over from the southern border. What I should mention is that we did have multiple instances of terrorism that were essentially started by Trump supporters during his term and after. As I said before, it is the #1 threat, according to the FBI, including an instance of a man mailing explosives to the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee, if I believe. Either that or the Democratic Party headquarters. I can't recall exactly, but one of those. And there was one other fellow who, I can recall this one again off the top of my head, who shot up a Walmart in El Paso? Yeah, it was in Texas, yeah. And he was a white supremacist whose whole motivation for this was essentially shooting up Latinos. But none of them came over through the border. He did manage, thankfully, to kill some terrorists. Nonsense. Nonsense. He's just making it up. Again, nonsense. Nonsense. Not just murder, but all crimes have dropped after the spike during COVID in the last couple of years, and especially violent crimes. The idea that we're living in some rat's nest of murder, especially murder by illegals who, as I've said before, commit crime at a lower level than the rest of the population. He's just making it up. He's making it up. No! We do not have a spree of murders. It's not happening. The crime rates are down. Every state is now a border. He's making it up. Yeah, you call it migrant crime, because you're making it up. Why not call it Biden migrant baby eating for whatever? It's nonsense. Yeah, we've never seen it because it's not there. On that, unfortunately, I can agree. We are becoming, at least a good chunk of our politics is becoming just plain old uncivilized. He's making it up. They're not living in luxury hotels. A few of these extremely desperate people have been put up in hotels. And thank God that they have. Because otherwise, what does he want to do? Shoot them all? It's just, what is your solution? Well, I mean, he's told us his solution, essentially, with him and Stephen Miller and their wonderful plan to round them all up in camps. Like, I'm a Jewish person, right? And all my life, I wondered to myself, like, how did the Holocaust even happen? What were the German people thinking? What was going through their heads? How do you do this? How do you get millions of people to go along with this? And now I'm not wondering that anymore, because I see it right in front of me. If Trump started deputizing Proud Boys and all these other militia members into the National Guard and had them round up these millions of people, many of whom have been living here for years, who work hard, who have families and children, just rounding them up And what happens to them in those camps? Maybe they deport them, maybe they shoot them and bury them in the desert, who the hell knows? And honestly, I don't think a single Trump supporter would even ask the question, what's happening to those people? Nor would they care. So this is something that I've looked into previously, because it's a story that has gotten a ton of traction on Fox News, that apparently veterans were being kicked out of hotels, kicked out of their homes and lodgings or what have you, to make room for illegal immigrants. It's nonsense. Complete fiction. So, talking about veterans, the way that our veterans have been treated by the Republicans in recent time is just, it's nauseating and it's infuriating, you know? You know who you should listen to this? Jon Stewart. Because he actually cares about veterans and firefighters and cops and all of those people who put themselves in danger to help others. And he was the one who went up on Capitol Hill. He knows a lot of these people. He actually got involved in all of these communities because he was involved with the 9/11 first responders in New York, the firefighters, the police, all of them. And through them, he ended up getting involved in the veterans community as well, because they were trying to pass the PACT Act. And the PACT Act provided benefits for veterans who had contracted diseases, and other people as well, who had contracted diseases from chemical exposure. And this was happening to the firefighters and cops in 9/11, and it was also happening to our veterans who were fighting in the Iraq War, for example, and with all of those burn pits where they were essentially getting rid of material waste by just lighting it on fire. And that was creating smoke, and I'm sure you can imagine that smoke didn't have any good stuff in it. And it was causing a lot of sickness and a lot of death. And these people, these soldiers, cops, firefighters, and whatnot, who had put their lives on the line for us, they were dying alone and broke because we weren't providing for them. And Jon Stewart was putting a lot of effort into changing that. And he went to Congress so many times, talked to a lot of people, and he tried to get this passed. And at least the first couple of times he tried, until they succeeded under Biden, this law was blocked by the Republicans. And it's just, I'm going to put a link in the description of this video of what Jon Stewart said before Congress on that day, because he really called them out for it, for their absolute lack of any kind of care for these people. When it's time to get on stage and talk about how patriotic they are and how much they love the military and veterans, oh yeah, they're all running on all cylinders. But when it's time to actually get together and legislate, to actually make policy, to make some changes, they're nowhere. They block everything. Because the only people they're interested in giving money to are themselves and their billionaire friends. And that was the same thing during Trump's term. Every budget he tried to pass that they originally proposed had cuts to the VA. During his term, he tried to use money from the VA as essentially a slush fund for projects that he couldn't get approved through Congress, including the border wall. He doesn't give a damn about these people. And we're going to see more of that coming up. Nonsense. Biden has worked really hard, and his VA has worked really hard to expand care, coverage, and funding for our veterans. So what he's talking about, something like Veterans Choice Act, I don't remember exactly the name, but firstly, it was actually passed by Obama, not by Trump, and secondly, it was not really a good thing. It was one of those public-private partnerships where they allow VA money to go to private medical facilities that were treating the veterans, and it ended up being a catastrophe. It led to increased costs and lower standard of care for veterans. He's making this up. He's making this up. I think he's making that up. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, this is a really horrible story. So, the Biden family has been through more tragedy than most people can even comprehend. So, a long time ago, back in the 70s, Biden's car was hit by a drunk driver, and his wife died. That was the mother of Hunter and Beau, and also she was pregnant at the time. The 2 kids almost died. So it was horrific. And on top of that, many years later, Beau becomes a veteran. He serves this country. He gets sick from these freaking burn pits, and he died. And it was actually, by the way, it was after that point that Hunter Biden kind of went off the rails. And so, like, he'd had problems before then, alcohol and whatnot. But it was after that that he got into heavier drugs and, like, really all the craziness that we've been hearing about. And it's because, just think about this, you're a kid, you watch your mother die in front of you, you're messed up for life. And then your big brother, who's, like, your hero, he dies in front of you. How are you not a wreck? And that's what happened to him. He was destroyed. And it just... we saw what the consequences were. And the fact that he's now being targeted and prosecuted for this, it is so sad. Yeah, that was Mark Kelly who said that. I'm sorry, no. No, I'm thinking John. Wait. Have I forgotten? 1 second. I'm back. It was John Kelly. Yes, I got it right the second time. I'm sorry. I keep getting him and Mark Milley confused. But it was John Kelly who originally shared that story. And actually, one of the first people he leaked it to was Jake Tapper, the moderator of this debate right here. That's the story about calling veterans suckers and losers, and it is just... it's horrible. No, it's not. John Kelly said it. And again, he said it to Jake Tapper, and yet Jake Tapper is going to make zero effort to try to confirm this story or call Trump out on his lie. Oh, and let's also not forget that it's not as if this was an aberration in Trump's behavior. He's the same guy who, on TV, said, I prefer the guys that weren't captured. You know, Mr. Bone Spurs draft dodger. The guy who made fun of that, not only the Gold Star family, which happened as well, but if you recall that disabled person with the hands, oh God, I can't even do it, the way that Trump makes fun of these people, you know, he always makes fun of anyone who has any decency or anyone who's, like, gone through a hard time. This isn't new behavior. So to think that that story is so preposterous, even if it hadn't been confirmed by John Kelly, who is a member of Trump's own administration, it would be absolutely believable. No, he didn't. Nonsense. You would say that, because you're a monster. It's just a lie. No. Russia was not made up. That happened. It was confirmed repeatedly. It was confirmed when Donald Trump Jr. posted his personal discussion with a representative of the Russian government, in which he literally says, thank you for your help that you have provided for the Trump campaign. And moreover, it was also confirmed when the Senate Intelligence Committee, under Marco Rubio, who still wants to be this guy's VP for some reason, actually demonstrated that, yes, the Russians were interfering in the 2016 election to a massive degree. So what he's referring to here is the 50 or 51, I believe it was 50, intelligence agents who said that the Biden laptop story bears all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And they were right, because this is a story that I'm going to do a longer video on, but it's something that gets misunderstood by a lot of people. Some of the data on that laptop, which wasn't actually a laptop, which happened was that the original laptop was left at a computer repair store, but what was originally, it was left at a computer repair store, and then it was found by Giuliani, and he who spread the story, but the files that were originally shared with the media were actually a copy. And there were signs of changes and modifications done to that copy. Not to mention the way that this was acquired in the first place, from Giuliani finding this random guy after he had already been engaged in really, really significant coordination with people in Russia and Ukraine. Because what a lot of people forget, actually, this is a very important story, Lev Parnas talks a lot about this, because Lev Parnas, he wasn't a member of Giuliani's team, but he was, at least not originally, but he was a person who had supported Trump, who had connections overseas in the kind of post-Soviet area, and he ended up being somehow connected to Rudy Giuliani and Trump's team, and they used him as their guide into the people and the kind of in-the-know elements that were existing in this post-Soviet space in both Ukraine, well, mostly in Ukraine, but a lot of those people were from Russia or associated with Russia, and those were the kind of people that they went to for information. And Lev Parnas goes into great detail about how Giuliani was seeking out people who were closer and closer to Putin, and that when they looked into the evidence and they did not find any real proof that Joe Biden was doing anything sneaky, Giuliani continued to push and continued to try to seek out anything, any kind of information, whether it was real or not, from anybody. And Lev Parnas, the insider's view that he gives on what was going on is just, it's crazy. And the fact is that it was 100% right for those intelligence agents to say that this looks like a Russian op, because when it's brought in by Giuliani, after going to that region of the world, after forming connections with a lot of actors that were very close to Yanukovych, for example, who was essentially Putin's puppet in Ukraine, and then he comes back to the United States, and all of a sudden he's got this weird laptop that came out of nowhere. Yeah, it looked like an op. And the fact that it turned out that at least some of the files on that drive were correct does not mean that it did not at the time look really, really suspicious, and that is all that those former intelligence agents said. I have no idea what he's talking about here. He's probably making it up. No, he did not. That came from John Kelly. Yeah. Yeah. They could do more still. He's making this up. Trump is not respected by Putin. Putin thinks Trump is a remarkably useful idiot. On his better days. Sometimes Putin thinks he's too stupid to be useful. Now, I will say this, I do believe that there is a chance that if Trump had been elected to a second term, that Putin would have held off on the invasion until Trump had successfully removed the US from NATO. On the other hand, I will say this, he'd been planning that invasion for a while, and the force buildup had been going on for a while. So who's to say if he would have waited? He's making things up. He has no information beyond that which the rest of us have. And the fact is that the numbers that we're getting from multiple sources, the casualty numbers. There's the official stuff that's put out by the Russians and the Ukrainians, and then there's a lot of various intelligence sources from other governments, and then there's people who are using open source intelligence to try to get the numbers. And we have fairly decent estimates of the losses on both sides. On the Russian side right now, it is currently plus 500,000. More than 500,000. Pretty comfortably. On the Ukrainian side, we are talking in total something like between 100 and 150,000. So it is a large number of dead on both sides, though admittedly the Russians are getting by far the worst of it, despite having a very strong advantage, at least in the mass of the weaponry that they can bring to bear. However, the Ukrainians are better trained, better motivated, and they're just better fighters. And they're fighting for their lives, for their families, on their own ground. And that's, plus again, the help of the West that has allowed them to do as well as they've had in this truly brutal conflict. Nonsense. Now, I do believe that watching what happened in Afghanistan absolutely emboldened Putin, but that would not have happened had Trump not literally completely ignored the Afghanistan government and negotiated squarely with the freaking Taliban to try to set up this withdrawal with no plan whatsoever, no time given, no preparation. Thankfully, Biden administration was able to delay it at least a little bit. God, yeah, I can't imagine how much worse it would have been had it been left in Trump's hands to manage that withdrawal. Would have been nice to say something if you freaking knew about the goddamn... This guy is such an ass. Nonsense. Again, all of this, a lot of the dialogue around foreign policy in regards to both the Ukraine and the Gaza situation, it gives far too much far too much agency to the United States and what we choose to do. The fact is that there's other stuff happening in other parts of the world for their own reasons. And all of these conflicts were brewing for a long time, regardless of what we did or did not do. Now, do we play a role? Is there an effect? Yes. But to blanketly make this... I mean, he's just making all of this up. He has no idea what he's talking about. Nonsense! We had multiple terror attacks, including within the United States, including by Islamist extremist terrorists, but also by white nationalist extremists. So he said Trump, he meant Putin. And he's referring to the statement that Trump made a couple of weeks ago when he says, if they don't pay, I'll just say, come on in, Putin, invade, go ahead, which, again, insane. He said it on TV. No. The amount of effort that Zelensky had to put in, and the Ukrainian government had to put in, and Biden, frankly, had to put in to get that $60 billion. And let's not forget that that sounds like a lot of money to you and me, but $60 billion is significantly less than what we spend on our military sitting on its ass in a month. Okay? It's a drop in the bucket for our military budget. And the effect that it has had, I mean, this money that we've put into Ukraine has effectively managed to knock out of play one of our biggest geopolitical rivals. We were terrified of Russia for decades. We spent trillions of dollars building up our military for decades to fight Russia. And now the Ukrainians are fighting them for pennies on the dollar without a single American having to get injured, let alone killed. Like, this is so stupid. He says, you know, he's going to invent the cure for cancer in between the time when he's elected and when he becomes inaugurated. He's going to raise the dead. He's going to make pigs fly. He's going to make the blind see. Just, he makes stuff up, and people buy it. More by this point. I'll actually disagree with him on this point, because Hamas is not the only one that wants to continue this war. The fact is that Netanyahu is perfectly happy keeping this war going, and as much as I hate to say this, a good portion of the Israeli population is with him on this. They are okay keeping this war going. But, again, it would be really, really nice if that peace plan does come to fruition. Yeah, so I want to clarify. Netanyahu did such an asinine thing when he claimed that America stopped providing any kind of weapon. It's such a lie, almost Trumpian in nature. America is still providing everything, except the one thing that Biden wanted to hold back were these massive 2,000-pound bombs. And I looked up these bombs a while back. They have a blast radius of like, no, actually I believe it was a blast diameter of about 1 kilometer. Okay? Like, we're talking about dropping these things in a populated area, in a city? That's beyond overkill. That's nuts. It would flatten such an area that it's beyond indiscriminate. And it's just unconscionable to use such a thing in an area that is just loaded down with civilians packed in like sardines. And I know you've got these psychopathic Hamas terrorists literally hiding under the robes of old ladies and whatnot. They're monsters. And you have to take them out somehow, but Jesus, not like that. Yeah. Yeah. So it is amazing, like the response when Iran attacked, sensing a moment of weakness, the Israel, along with the weapons and material that were provided to them by the United States and the Iron Dome system and all of that, they were able to block every single one, and they were basically able to, this is Iran trying to show its face, and they're just like, sit down, and they just put him down like that, and that was a great move, I have to say. Yep. Again, if he could just deliver all of this with volume and clarity, because even his stutter is coming through right now, and, I saw a lot of the reaction to this debate this morning, and Biden's doing okay on the substance. He really is okay, but his delivery just looks so flaccid. No, I think they're really getting up there. I think they might have even surpassed us at this point. Certainly as a percentage of GDP. So, again, he's just making this up. He does not understand how NATO works. NATO is not a pool of money that other people contribute to. Or, there's a pittance that's devoted to maintaining the office buildings and stuff like that everybody contributes to. But the 2% number, that contribution that people are talking about, that's what countries are supposed to spend on their own militaries, not what they provide to NATO. They're just supposed to have their own militaries up to snuff if, let's say, there's a triggering of an Article 5 provision and everybody's got to go to war, that they're ready to contribute. And, in fact, under Trump, none of this got done. He had no leverage at all and was just completely uninterested in actually negotiating, certainly with our allies. Under Biden's term, it's been transformational. We've had the largest expansion of NATO in decades, the largest strengthening of our alliance structure in decades, the greatest increase in spending by our allies in decades. If there is anything positive about this horrific situation in Ukraine, it's that NATO and its European allies especially have finally realized, oh crap, something could actually happen, and maybe the US won't be around to protect us at all. So they've kind of been scared straight, frankly, and a lot of that has come from Biden's ability to negotiate and to cajole these people into doing the right thing. That's a lie. A lie. So he's actually right on this one point that Israel does want to continue going. But finish the job, frankly, Netanyahu benefits from this war lasting as long as possible. And that's why I think it's, unfortunately, Biden's hopes of achieving a peace are... I wish him well, but I don't know if there's a lot of chance of that. And unfortunately, Netanyahu is going to be utterly incapable of solving this problem. He is not going to be able to end this war with a lasting peace. It's just going to lead to death on a massive scale and no long-term solution. So Biden has actually been more supportive of Israel than any other president in American history. He is the first president to visit Israel in wartime. He has provided more wholehearted support simply in terms of his speeches than any president ever, and he has taken a lot of flack from his left flank for this. Yep. You see, this is what it means when a guy actually understands not just his job, but specifically the world, foreign policy, how to deal with the people out there. Because the thing that's most likely to lead to nuclear war is if we do not stop Putin in Ukraine. Yep, a lot of our Asian alliances have been strengthened under Biden, and that's only a good sign, because believe me, China is eyeing the Ukraine situation, and they're eyeing Taiwan hungrily. Also true. You know, we have to see all this kind of thing. Trump is so... I don't want to say he's good at it, but it's a trick that he uses repeatedly. He says, I'll think about it, or we'll release something on that next week, or I've got a great plan, and we'll put out a statement on it, and he never does. Because he actually doesn't understand any of these issues. He has no plan. He has no opinion on a Palestinian state other than that he hates Muslims. But other than that, he just has no idea what he's talking about. What is he even talking about? We have a very solid trade with Europe, and it goes in both ways. Again, none of that happened during Trump's term. Biden was the one that got NATO countries to start spending on their military. No, he didn't. He just made this up. Like, here's kind of the troublesome thing about Trump, is that he lies so much, is that I really have no idea if he's had any of these conversations. I don't think he has, but yet they're also kind of damaging to him. It's an admission against interest. It's so stupid what he is saying. He is admitting that he had said that he was not going to not protect NATO. That's not what we're doing. We are fighting with our allies. But again, it is very, very hard to make sense of this man. No, we're not. total ducking of the question. I'm not going to say anything right now. It's going to get worse, and then I'm going to just blow my top. I can't keep going. Already, like, there's a moment that's coming up that is, I was trying to wait until, but I can't. This guy is absurd in the claims that he makes. Aside from the fact that he's not answering the question at all, he did not provide there were no 10,000 National Guard. In fact, the video that he is talking about, which is available online, you can see what happened was that Nancy Pelosi's daughter, actually, who is a documentary filmmaker, was coming in to kind of film her mother on the last days, because it was coming to be the end of the term and whatnot. So I want to see the last days of her speakership, at least this time around. And you could see the panic that was going on, how terrified and confused and shocked and just unbelieving all of the Congress people were at what was going on January 6th, that they were hiding out in this room just like, what is going on? And they were all talking amongst themselves, and Nancy Pelosi was on the phone, and she was talking about, like, can we get the National Guard? Can we get someone to come in? Anything like this? And they said, no, of course not, because the president had not ordered it. Very specifically, we have not only the records coming in and out of the White House at the time, so we know every single phone call that he made. We have the testimony of all the people in his administration, including, of course, the military officials who would have been in charge of actually moving National Guard troops once they got that order. And everyone was very clear that Trump made no such order. And specifically, the conversation that he's talking about, she was there on the phone saying, guys, can you send us someone? Can you help us? This is crazy. And they couldn't do anything. And he's just lying about it. They were coming because he had stoked the fury of these people by lying about the election. And again, I have a whole video that I already made on all of his lies about voter fraud. There's another video coming up where we're going to explore specifically what happened on the day of January 6th. And I don't want to go into all of that now. But the fact is that he lost the election. He knew he lost. Everyone around him told him he lost. He said he didn't lose. He just lied about it. And then he started fomenting that violence because he was saying, oh, there's going to be on January 6th, it's going to be wild. And he knew because his closest advisors, including his own Secret Service detail and the head of the FBI, they were all telling him that, hey, we've got a lot of chatter that people are going to be coming up here and they're going to be armed. And that these Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, all those crazies were going to be coming, and they're going to be ready to march on the Capitol. And he knew that. And he, in fact, told the Secret Service to take away all the metal detectors, so that if those people were armed, they would have an easier time coming in for their attack on the Capitol, which they did end up doing. And while that attack went on, as Jake Tapper said, he didn't do anything. Trump, for hours, just sat on his ass and let it happen. And as he was being contacted, there were a lot of phone calls going on that day of people, congressmen and women, desperate for help. One of them was Nancy Pelosi trying to call some sort of law enforcement agency to come in and help. One of the other ones was Kevin McCarthy calling this guy and saying, hey, help us, call them off. And Trump says, they're not here for me. Because he knew that those guys threatening the Capitol, they were on his side. They would never hurt him. They would only hurt his enemies. So why would he stop them? No, he did not. He did nothing. No, he did not. So this is the bit that I was waiting for, because when I heard that yesterday, I stood up and just started cursing through my teeth. Who believes that? Does anyone believe that Nancy Pelosi on tape admitted to the responsibility for January 6th, that she admitted to not accepting the aid of National Guard? Does anyone believe that? But he's saying it anyway. And no one's, of course, going to call him out on it. Jake Tapper isn't going to call him out on it. And they're not even going to ask him about the 2020 election. No, she didn't. Yeah, they were literally calling him and begging him, including his own children. And we know that because we've seen their text messages and we have heard the recordings of those conversations, all of which are public. Again, I just wish he could say this with a little more volume and force. 61. So what Biden's referring to, he's slightly crossing up two things. There were the cases before January 6th when Trump was trying to actually, he wasn't really trying to prove voter fraud, because if you actually looked at the specific cases, his attorneys didn't even try to claim that there was voter fraud because they had no evidence whatsoever. They were only claiming that in the public eye. Or at least in the magnitude of their claims. The claims that they actually made in court were a lot smaller, and a lot of them were procedural, like in one case, can poll watchers be 6 feet away or 10 feet away from the people casting their votes? And I think that small one he might have won. He did win one case on a very minor procedural issue like that, but in no court in the land was he able to prove even a single stolen or fraudulent vote. Not one. And he was defeated in court 60 times. The one victory was for something, again, totally unrelated to even a single vote being moved one way or the other. Now, the other cases that I believe Biden is kind of shoving this together with are the cases that have been occurring more recently, the prosecutions of the January 6 rioters, who Trump has called heroes, despite the fact that they put some 140 police officers in the hospital. Back the blue until they try to stop you from doing a coup. Back the blue until they stop you from doing a coup. It even rhymes. But it's, the worst thing about this is that just today, the Supreme Court, in one of a series of vomit-inducing decisions, decided to basically let a lot of these guys off the hook by saying that, God, it makes me so angry. So, what happened was that the law under which one of several laws under which these rioters were prosecuted involved interfering with a government proceeding, interfering, obstructing, etc. Now, the statute reads, it's illegal if you alter or destroy any document, or if you otherwise impede or obstruct any official proceeding. And we can see that they obstructed the proceeding because the certification of the votes was in fact delayed by some several hours while the congressmen and women were running for their lives, basically. And the Supreme Court's like, nah, we don't like that, so no? And it's amazing. It's so plain. It says document or otherwise impeding or obstructing an official proceeding, and they just ignore that whole bit, despite the fact that they call themselves originalists and textualists and whatnot. And it's not the first time they've done that. They just ignore any law that they don't like. Yeah. They're guilty as hell. They were convicted by a jury of their peers, not by a Justice Department, not by Biden, not by any of them, by a jury of their peers in a court of law where they had representation, where they had their full constitutional rights. The reason those people were in jail is because they broke into our Capitol, beat the crap out of a bunch of cops, tried to kill the Speaker of the House and the Vice President and a whole bunch of Congress people, and basically overturn our democracy. That is why they are in jail. And they should be. Nonsense. So, Portland's still there, okay? The amount of ridiculous exaggeration in regards to the Black Lives Matter riots that occurred in 2020 is just absurd. I just want to make a couple of points. So, firstly, a lot of what you've heard about those riots has been exaggerated. Secondly, there have been hundreds and hundreds of arrests, prosecutions, and convictions of people involved in those riots. And there were actually multiple convictions of people who were not affiliated with Black Lives Matter or Antifa or any of that. They were part of what was called the Boogaloo Boys, who were a group of, and some other small groups, who were affiliated with a lot of these far-right militias and just went in there to stir shit up. And they were the ones that were, in fact, behind a lot of the violence and a lot of the looting. They were the ones that originally started the chaos. And unlike the claims that were made by Tucker Carlson and whatnot, that, what happened on January 6th was a false flag by the FBI, this stuff was actually proven in court. Those Boogaloo Boys are sitting in jail for what they did in regards to instigating those riots. Nonsense. No, they didn't. Peacefully, there was a gallows right there. They're screaming, hang Mike Pence. They built a gallows. They physically broke in. Glass was broken. Furniture was broken. Barricades were broken. Cops' bodies were broken. They broke in. It was violent. And they were screaming for blood. I mean, one guy took a dump on the speaker's desk. The only decent people in that party, and that's why they left. This is a claim he's made before. It is nonsense. Everything is available publicly right now. Everything. You can watch the hearings. In fact, Adam Kinzinger, the first time he said this, Adam Kinzinger was nice enough to post on Twitter a public link to the files, and you can download them. It's all publicly available. He's lying through his teeth. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. It's all publicly available. Nonsense. He has made it very clear that he intends to punish his perceived enemies and to put them in jail. You cannot say something 50 times and then say something else different once and then act like that's the only thing you said. No, it isn't. God, it is so sad what happened to Hunter Biden. I'll tell you, actually, the specific case that he was already convicted on, the gun crimes case, he really should never have been prosecuted, because the FBI, I believe this was data for last year, they identified some 12,000 instances of people being untruthful on these forms that Hunter Biden filled out, where he had said that he was not under the influence of narcotics or an illegal user of drugs when he in fact was. So the FBI identifies about 12,000 such cases a year. They prosecuted 12. And they did so only in cases, and it is in fact official Justice Department protocol, to only prosecute such cases when there is some sort of aggravating factor, like if this gun was used in the perpetration of some other violent crime. That is not what happened in Hunter Biden's case. He threw it out after something like 11 days, if I remember correctly, and as it turns out, he was most likely going to use that gun on himself. It is deeply sad, and the fact is that if he was not Joe Biden's son, he would not have been prosecuted. And you can tell that by looking right at the official protocol. And the fact that he was prosecuted is frankly a miscarriage of justice, because here you've got this traumatized, recovering addict. Punishing him is not going to serve the cause of justice. He's not at risk of doing this again. It's just going to make it worse. But of course, Biden can't interfere because he knows what the Republicans are going to say. They're going to say it anyway, but he has to be the bigger man. And he, in fact, left the Trump-appointed prosecutor, David Weiss, to handle this case. He literally left it in the hands of the guy appointed by his worst enemy because he didn't want to create the impression that he was interfering in some way. You know, normally presidents remove all the previous U.S. attorneys and replace them with their own. Biden left this specific guy who was investigating his own son. And that's why we are where we are. Nonsense. Isn't making it up. Nonsense. I'm gonna do a longer video about all of this made up crap about Joe Biden. There is zero evidence whatsoever that Joe Biden has done anything wrong or participated in any kind of malfeasance of any kind, not a penny from anyone in an illegal way, not a hint of any kind of action in an unkosher or illegal environment. There's nothing on Joe Biden at all. No, he hasn't. So, that situation, again, another one of Trump's lies. Shokin, the prosecutor, was blatantly corrupt. In fact, the Republicans, before this happened, wrote a letter to Biden asking him to remove, not to remove, he couldn't do that himself, but to pressure for Shokin's removal. And Biden was working, again, in line with what the U.S. various intelligence and defense agencies were advising him was the case to do. It was in concert with what our allies in Europe were asking him to do, and it is in fact in concert with what the Republicans were asking him to do. And this nonsense that Shokin was somehow prosecuting Hunter is also not true, because as we found out from Devin Archer's testimony, Shokin was the krysha for Hunter. That's a Russian term, it means a roof. where, you know, everybody's got to have a roof. Everybody's got to have somebody who protects them, who covers them, so that they're not investigated or prosecuted or anything like this. It's a system of post-Soviet corruption. And Shokin was that guy for Burisma. And by removing him, he actually put Burisma, the company the country was working for, in more jeopardy. So everything about Trump's claim here is nonsense. You literally did say that. That's what you were impeached for the first time. Nonsense. Nonsense. He's just making it up. All his points are good. Again, if he just delivered it with a bit more force and clarity. And the other thing with Trump is that you can't just say, oh, you're lying, because then it devolves into like a he said, she said type of thing. You got to be able to lay out the specifics of how he's lying. What is it exactly that's a lie? What is the reality? What the evidence is, as I try to do. Yeah, you did, you ass. Nonsense. No, they're not. Bragg was elected. Biden had nothing to do with any of this. This was a state-level prosecution. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't have done anything. They went up among Republicans because Republicans believe literally anything this guy tells him. But other than that, his actual total aggregate poll numbers took a slight dip after that conviction. And again, the evidence in that case was just overwhelming. You had so many documents. You had all of those checks that Trump was signing, not just the checks, but also the vouchers and receipts, all that kind of thing. You had the testimony of people from his organization. You had not just Michael Cohen, who they scream about a lot, but also David Pecker, who, while not a member of Trump's organization, was affiliated with him in this conspiracy and considers himself a close friend to Trump. And nonetheless, David Pecker was very clear that the purpose of the payments to Stormy Daniels was as part of a larger catch-and-kill scheme to catch and kill damaging stories to Trump, and the purpose of that was to assist in his election victory. And that is a campaign finance violation. The fact that they are disguising these payments means that they're engaging in business fraud. And the fact that the purpose of those fraudulent documents was the affectation of some sort of how would we say this, disruption in what otherwise the democratic process would be, in what otherwise the media landscape would be. That effectively turns the money that he spent on this into a campaign contribution. And that is one of several theories that the prosecutors used to take him down. But again, the evidence in this case, the amount of paperwork that they had alone, they had him dead to rights. That's actually a sad thing. It's not hundreds of millions of dollars, but they have taken in a lot of money. And the amount of money that Trump has managed to bamboozle out of people who really can't afford it is sad. You know, it reminds me a lot of these like mega church pastors who prey on, admittedly, the same people, who tell these poor people that they can fix all of their problems, just give me your money. And they do. Though admittedly, the majority of Trump's donations are coming from billionaires. In fact, the wealthiest Americans are donating at a rate of something like 70-30, Trump versus Biden. Nonsense. Yeah, if they only knew, that would be nice. And that's actually such an important point, because while it seems that most likely because of Supreme Court interference, the cases will not be proceeding before the election, they certainly will be proceeding after. And if Trump is in office, they're going to be put on hold. And they're going to be waiting for him when he leaves. And that's why he will never leave. He will never leave. And in the meantime, he will do everything possible, again, if he gets into power, to just dismantle any of the governmental structures that would have been able to hold him to account. He's going to dismantle the Justice Department. He's going to dismantle the courts. He's going to dismantle the FBI. And they've literally written a plan to do this. The whole Project 2025, it's some nearly 1,000 pages of how they are going to, Trump and his people, if they manage to get elected, to just dissolve every aspect of our government and turn it into basically like a mafia family that Trump is at the head of, where he appoints everybody and he controls everything, and there are no checks and balances or any sort of mechanisms by which he can be held to account. Again, if only he could say this with a clear voice and some projection. No. No. Nonsense. Well, I do agree that there shouldn't be a debate. The fact that this traitorous psychopath is on this stage again is just mind-boggling. That happened on TV. Like, he said it on TV, on national television, that whole good people on both sides. Like, we all saw that. It happened on TV! He's just making this up. He's talking, but there's no words. Yeah, because he would almost got killed the last time. Okay, I'm going to take a pause on that first half and finish this up tomorrow, but that was really brutal. But I will say this, though, I've been looking at the reactions in the media today, And honestly, I kind of went along with it this morning. I was thinking, like, wow, yeah, that debate was not good. But now that I'm watching it again and going through it point by point, Biden actually made several very cogent points. It's just that the impression given by his delivery is awful. And that's what I've seen. That's what seems to be sticking with people today. And it's a really tough situation. Okay, guys, that's going to be a little bit of a break, and we'll return likely tomorrow. Hey everyone, and we are back after a bit of a break. So let's just say it has been an interesting last 48 hours or so since the debate. The entire news cycle has been filled with all sorts of commentary. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been tough. And I have my own thoughts about the debate, about the aftermath, about the reaction, and I'm going to be making a video on that. But first, I had started this project, and I do want to finish making a point-by-point commentary on this debate and what's going on. So let's get to it. These facts are accurate. I just wish he could, again, I wish that he could project, because I understand what he's talking about. The content is there. You just need to be able to deliver this. And here he's having a difficulty, again, with Biden, it's hard to tell because you have a lot of commingling factors. You have his lifelong stutter, you have his age, you have potentially this cold that supposedly he has. And I don't know if to what degree those things are affecting him, or to what degree he is really having difficulty just getting these words out. But what's behind them, the actual policies that he is referring to, these are good points. The numbers are looking good for black people relative to where they were, though it is still, they have not achieved parity yet. Like I said, I just made a pretty long economics video on this, that all this stuff that Republicans are saying about how supposedly people on welfare and black people have special advantages, that they're getting all the money, all the privileges, it's nonsense. They still have less than white people in almost every respect, in every area you can name. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on that. So there was support for child care costs, and also not just for black people, but for all families. That expanded tax credit for children cut the rate of childhood poverty by something like half. And that was really tremendous, and that was for everyone until Republicans got rid of it, though hopefully it might be added back on in upcoming budgetary negotiations, I hope, for the upcoming year. Empathy, you know, it's something that he has. So that's a lie. Our inflation, let's remember that inflation was a global crisis, and our inflation dropped faster than any other advanced economy. And when you look at the data, well, multiple things contribute to the cost of inflation, to the causes of inflation, and the increased costs that result from that. However, if corporate profits had simply remained at the record levels that they were at before COVID, then, before this recent inflationary spike post-COVID, then we wouldn't have had inflation like this. We would have been back to normal a long time ago. Had they just, again, kept at the record profits they already had. But because almost every industry in our economy has been dominated by oligopolies, and they're trying to become monopolies, but when there are shocks to the economy, they have the ability to raise prices higher for longer because there's less competition. And that's exactly what they did, and we can see it in the data because their profits just exploded while all of us were suffering from inflation. No, it's not doubled and tripled. Inflation overall has gone up by about 23% across the board. But yeah, it is squeezing people, unfortunately, though no, it is not Biden's fault. No inflation, but the highest rate of unemployment since the 2008 collapse. An economy that was basically in a state of shutdown. People dying at a tremendous rate from COVID. It was a catastrophe. Inflation, that's the tricky thing about inflation, that oftentimes it's a sign of economic growth. It's a sign of the economy overheating. It's not the only factor, of course, but it's very common that when the economy is utterly in the toilet, you're not going to get any inflation at all. Or even deflation. So the Green New Deal was never even passed. So, of course, the facts don't matter, right? But the parts of it that we did get, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Chips and Sciences Act, these were tremendous pieces of legislation. These are the largest investments, not just in infrastructure, but also in specifically green energy infrastructure, and most importantly, I think, from a national security perspective, the Chips and Sciences Act, what it did to get us on the road towards independence from countries that are, again, our geopolitical adversaries is a really big deal. We don't want to be dependent on China. And the way to do that is not with tariffs, or at least not just with tariffs. You have to actually do something to encourage local development and investment. You see, that's how tariffs are supposed to work, ideally. That, you block off the sales from another country by raising the prices, and at the same time, you use that moment to kind of generate investment and build up your own industry so that you can compete fairly against this other nation. That's kind of how tariffs started out in the late 19th century. It became a big thing in the United States because we were competing with Britain, which was a lot more industrialized, and our industries over here at home needed to catch up. But now we're in a very, very different global economic situation. Our industries in the United States are already advanced and developed, a lot of them. Our economy has kind of progressed past the point, actually, where we were relying on a lot of these industries. And if we want to start doing new things, it's not just a matter of waiting until our economy catches up or grows up or matures. It's already mature. You have to actively encourage it to grow in a particular direction. And if you don't have that, tariffs are just a big pain in the backside, unfortunately, and don't really help too much. But regardless, main point is he's making up what he's saying. What is a black job now? I mean, I assume for Trump they're only janitors and drug dealers and whatnot. In fact, he wouldn't let black people live in his apartments. Let's not forget that. That he and his father conspired to deny black people the ability to rent apartments at Trump Tower. But the other information he's saying is also nonsense. It is not whatever number he gave, 18 million, I believe, at some point, illegal immigrants. We have had some large number of people coming into the country recently. Many of them, in fact, not illegally, just coming in through our massively overloaded asylum system, which we've been trying to fix, if not for the fact that Republicans are blocking it. But they are absolutely not taking your jobs. The fact is, you also have to remember that every producer, every worker is also a consumer. Every immigrant that comes to this country, they gotta eat. Their kids gotta go to school. They gotta buy stuff, to live and whatnot. They just become part of the economy. They produce and they also consume, and their consumption generates jobs for other people as well. And the fact is that a big part of our recent economic growth has been because we've got people coming in and frankly working their backsides off. I mean, we all know how these people work, how hard they work. And it's all just to live a better life for themselves and maybe send something back to their families. It is not some sinister plot to take over America. And he just keeps on demonizing these people. That's the other advantage he has. He doesn't have to talk about policy. He doesn't have to remember data or numbers. He can just make stuff up and go back to the same point again and again. 19, 20 million people. He's making it up. There we go. So I just want to say, on a personal point, the ACA is the reason why I'm not a cripple. Because when I was about 19, 20 years old, I had several injuries to my lower back, herniated discs. And if not for the ACA, I would have had no health insurance. Those operations that I had to get me going again would have cost, something like $250,000. We paid basically nothing. And that is, again, because of the ACA, which these guys have tried to get rid of again and again. That's actually another point, and I covered this in another video. All of this defund the police nonsense is just that, nonsense. In every single budgetary proposal recently, we've had Democrats proposing increased funding for local police, for border patrol, for other forms of law enforcement and whatnot, and it's Republicans who are blocking it at every time. In fact, defunding the FBI and the Justice Department is a pretty large factor on their platform. We've got the Speaker of the House talking about that like it's a policy agenda issue. Malfeasance. Again, if you just would pronounce the words properly and enunciate. So he's not answering the question. He's going to do this. He has done this. He's going to continue to do it. And again, most of these guys do not believe climate change is a thing, despite the really tremendous evidence. You know what? I'm going to help you guys out. I'm going to give you a little favor, and you can use this with all your friends. Any one of you can prove climate change at home in your kitchen table, okay? You just need some sort of clear container of glass or plastic, something that's airtight, a canister of, let's say, air, pure air, and a canister of pure CO2. You take one glass jar or bottle or something, pump it full of air, close it up, pump the other one full of CO2, close it up, then you quickly grab a thermometer, 2 thermometers, you grab one for each bottle, just pop it open a little bit, drop it in there, do the same thing to the other one, and then you take a heat lamp, like, you know, what you would use for a pet lizard or something like that, and shine it at the bottle, see which one gets hotter. It's going to prove global warming just like that on your kitchen table. And the thing is that the rules of physics do not change from your kitchen table to the rest of the planet. So, you know, just in case you ever meet a climate change denier out there. Unfortunately true. Nonsense. So this is actually a sad point, but also shockingly hypocritical. So the Democratic Party in the 90s was not the party that it is today. And after Reagan's just blowout victories and holding the presidency for 12 years between Reagan and Bush, Clinton came in, and he was a very different type of kind of Democratic Party. It was extremely centrist, and it had gone in a lot of ways towards the right. In fact, Clinton did as much what they called welfare reform, but was really welfare reduction, as much as Reagan did, essentially. They had a lot more in common than they had different, and Biden is a product of that time. And there have been some times in his past where he has said and done things which, let's just say, I think he regrets today, and certainly are a very different place from where this Democratic Party stands today. Now, the hypocrisy is that while this was going on, actually even before then, this I believe this started out in the 70s, the Central Park Five. Regardless, there was an event going on in New York City, which there had been a crime, a murder, I believe. Actually, you know, let me check it out. I'm going to Google it again. I don't recall right off the top of my head. Let's get the details. I don't want to get this wrong. There we go. So there was a woman, no, she was assaulted and raped. Okay, that's what happened, not murdered. But what ended up happening is that Trump, he named 5 men. He was involved in naming these men as perpetrators of the crime. He ended up pushing the story very heavily in newspapers and tabloids at the time, and he had connections to a lot of these people, including like David Pecker, for example, as we've heard from his trial, because Trump himself was often in these papers, in these tabloids, and he was getting attention for himself, essentially, by accusing these 5 very young African-American men of committing this heinous crime. And what ended up coming out was that they were not guilty. And Trump had essentially contributed to the wrongful imprisonment of a handful of these young men. That, combined with the fact that he and his father were engaged in a conspiracy and were in fact under federal investigation and prosecution and fines for engaging in a conspiracy to keep black people out from their properties. I mean, my God, this guy has absolutely no claim to have any credit in actually caring about black people. So, another just stream of nonsense. Well, you know what, here it's actually even more devious. I'll give you an example, because whenever Trump tries to pander to a certain group, he's done this before, especially early in his last term. He even did that with the LGBT community a little bit. He panders to them, but it always ends up being towards his own advantage, like these economic opportunity zones, for example. So This was part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and it set up these zones, which were designed to be underprivileged, minority neighborhoods, right? And the idea was that it was going to be a tax break for these people. However, you could only get a tax break if you were investing capital in these places, and you kept it for over 10 years. You kept the capital invested for over 10 years. So what it is, it's an extension of the capital gains tax. What is that? When you hold some sort of asset, like a stock or a bond or real estate or what have you, the value of that asset on the market appreciates over time. Like with stocks, you can be holding on to it and you bought it at $1,000 and now it's $1,500 some number later. And you, on paper, you have this money because the value of what you have, of the capital you have, has increased. But it's not real yet because you haven't actually sold the thing. You only get the money when you sell it. And the gain that you make when you actually sell the thing, that's called capital gains, because it's gains on the value of your capital, right? And that's typically when it's taxed upon sale, when you've actually realized the gain. Now, what Trump did is that he allowed a lower, or in fact, it might have even been a fully discharged capital gains tax if you had made an investment, I believe, of over $1 million and had kept it for over 10 years. Kept it vested, not cashed out, and actually realized that gain for at least 10 years. And the thing is, I want you to think for a minute, how many black and Latino and other minority people living in minority neighborhoods have millions of dollars not only lying around, but that they don't need to touch for 10 years? Okay? Zero. So of course the main beneficiaries were not these people, but were, for example, large developers who would come in, buy out a certain chunk of one of these neighborhoods, build a nice high-rise, or a nice, maybe an apartment complex for well-to-do families, things like that, and they end up gentrifying these neighborhoods, kicking out, essentially, the people who actually used to live there and were supposed to benefit from this thing, and replacing them with people who could afford to live in these kind of developments. And then these large developers would take the benefit of this capital gains tax reduction. So even when it looks like Trump is doing something for black people, it's always, there's something else behind it. Tim Scott, actually, I just want to say, he really hurts my heart in a way, because the first time I had heard of Tim Scott was when I'd heard a speech delivered by my senator, I'm very proud of him, Cory Booker. And he said, I respect Tim Scott, I used to work with him, he's not one of the crazy ones. And I was like, oh, okay, so Tim Scott, maybe he's a good guy. And then I'm seeing how he's debased himself, especially in the most recent, in his kind of campaign for basically vice president, the way that he recently wouldn't even admit to agreeing to certify the 2024 election. I mean, he's just, he is so low, and I have lost any and all respect for him. And when you lose respect for someone that you thought you'd had respect for, that's worse than never having respected them at all, frankly. No, it wasn't. No, they aren't. So this is also deeply sad. Trump's numbers among black men, not black women, but black men, are higher than they've been for a Republican in a very long time. And there are reasons for this that I've been pondering, but I'm not going to discuss them now. He's still leading among black people tremendously, Biden. Again, they're not taking jobs. They contribute to the economy tremendously. And he totally ignored the original question. Yeah. So, this is a guy who genuinely doesn't understand what the climate crisis is. And firstly, part of his plan, 2025, the Project 2025 plan, involves basically destroying the EPA and dismantling it entirely. So, no, if he gets away with that, we will not have clean water or clean air. But again, that's not the problem. The problem is that it's getting hotter. He's making this up. He's making that up. No, they didn't. So here, Biden is letting Trump bait him a little bit, which I don't think he should. I think he should have stayed on the climate change issue. But now, because Trump went into HBCUs, Biden's got to go into that again. I don't think that was a great approach. But other than that, yes, Biden has simultaneously made the greatest investment in clean energy that we've ever had, which is, again, an investment for the long term. But for the short term, we are also at the highest level of oil production of any country ever in order to get our gas prices back under control and, of course, insulate us from dependence on any of the not-so-friendly people in the world that we might otherwise have to get oil from. The one slight disagreement is that it's not going to be actually totally the end of the world if we go past 1.5 Celsius. But there will be changes to the system, to our climatic system, that will be really, really, really hard to undo. And Biden is making a good point that Trump pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord, and he genuinely does not care about this issue whatsoever. I just wish that he could, I'm sounding like a broken record, but enunciate. He's making that up. I will say this, though. One of the difficult things about the climate change solution, about the climate change problem, is another thing called the free rider problem, which is something that comes from the study of economics, where, let's say you're building something that everyone can use, like a road, and you might have people coming onto it and benefiting from it that didn't pay for it. Likewise, in climate change, we have just one planet that we all share, and if we try to clean up our energy production system, then not only we are going to benefit from it, but China is going to benefit from it, India is going to benefit from it, even if they don't necessarily institute those same protocols. And likewise, if they continue to produce fossil fuel, if they continue to use fossil fuels and produce carbon dioxide at the rate at which they have been, that's going to be a problem for all of us, but they're the ones that are going to be reaping the benefit of still being able to use that relatively cheap and simple to produce energy. Now, there's nothing really we can do about it, because it's like, imagine you're on a boat that's sinking, and we're trying to bail, and some of the people on the boat aren't bailing. And we're like, wow, those assholes, that's not fair. I mean, guys, come on, we're all sinking, bail. But does that mean that you stop bailing? No, because you don't want to drown. And that's the thing, we don't have a choice. We're all in this planet together, and unless we do something about this, whatever we can, we're all going to be screwed together, unfortunately. Trump is the guy that's saying, basically, I'm also not going to bail, so let's all just drown. By the way, no one pays into it. It's It was a series of regulations and goals for how countries are supposed to generate their energy. It doesn't involve paying money to Paris or something like that, just like NATO doesn't involve actually paying money to NATO, except for a pittance for the maintenance of facilities. It's what the countries are doing themselves, for themselves, within their own countries, that they are agreeing to do together as a group. You see, this is amazing. Like, what can you do with that? Because Trump is lying. Biden is the one who arranged for insulin to go down to $35 per vial or per dosage, whatever it is. Not a diabetic, so I don't know exactly what the pricing is. But Trump is just saying, he didn't do it, I did it. Like, what do you do in that situation when you don't have anyone providing a fact check? And when they're not even allowed to bring notes or anything like that, or any sort of proof to say, like, hey, here's my documents or what have you. It's just he said and he said. And how is an audience supposed to pick between that? Okay, biggest heart on the stage. Wow. Okay. But regardless, what he's saying about migrants and their access to social services is, again, a lie. They do not get these services, and a lot of them suffer for it. And he says that while Republicans are constantly trying to cut those programs. So two things. The content of what he's saying is fine. It's just the words and the phrases essentially flow together, and that makes it harder to interpret the things that he's saying. So this starts out great. That is the answer. That is how you keep these programs solvent. You tax the wealthy, but it's going to go downhill. So Biden, he was accurate in a lot of the things that he said, and a lot of the numbers that he tried to say, there were moments of him confusing or switching out one number for another and just having difficulty getting it out. But what he is referring to is accurate, and it is correct. Again, he can just turn it around. And unless someone stops him, how's the public going to know who's telling the truth and who's lying? So, the fact is that Trump was let's put it this way. It has been entirely confirmed that the government of Russia attempted to interfere and successfully did interfere with the 2016 United States election. They did so via a massive campaign of social media misinformation. This was done as an operation handled by the Russian government with the full knowledge and approval of Putin. It reached millions and millions of voters in America, the content that was generated by this operation. That content and the activities of that operation were verified by the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee under Marco Rubio. More than that, while Robert Mueller declined to say that Trump did engage in collusion with the Russians, he also didn't say that he did not. And frankly, collusion is, again, depending on the situation, it can be a bit of a difficult standard to prove. However, because again, it is a term that is specifically defined in law. However, Trump did know and was thankful for the assistance of the Russian government in his 2016 election, and we know that, not because of anything that was said by any Democrat, or even by anything that came out of any Republican politician or anything like that, but because Donald Trump Jr. posted publicly on Twitter his own private communications with someone who was representing the interests of the Russian government. And he, in fact, specifically said, he specifically typed that he was thankful for the efforts of the Russian government. And I'm going to link that in the description of this video. So let's be clear, all of that stuff happened as opposed to this laptop situation, which is, again, to be clear, there was a laptop. It was, at one point, owned by Hunter Biden. However, that laptop was then lost at a computer repair store. Then it was discovered by Rudy Giuliani. But what Rudy Giuliani gave to the world, to the media, was not actually a physical laptop. It was not the physical laptop that Hunter Biden had used. It was a drive containing data from that laptop, some of which, much of which, has been authenticated, a lot of which has not, and a lot of which shows signs of some tampering. And moreover, Giuliani did this, after returning from a visit to Ukraine, where he met with a lot of people who represented the Russian government through their connections to Viktor Yanukovych, the former Ukrainian president, who was essentially a pro-Russian troll, basically. Like, he was a tool for Putin to enact his policy and bring Ukraine closer to Russia. And that all of the people he was working with and the people that Giuliani connected with were effectively an extension of the Russian government and their most corrupt allies in Ukraine. So every time Trump says Russia hoax, whatever, It's not a hoax, people. It is real. So it's not a lie. The suckers and losers came from John Kelly, who again was a member of Trump's administration, very high up. And the thing that most bothers me is that the moderator of this debate, Jake Tapper, was the guy that interviewed John Kelly. He helped break this story. So he knows personally that Trump is lying, like he himself was there. And yet he is doing nothing to correct what Trump is saying. Again, always have to bring it back to demonizing immigrants and lying about how they're getting on Social Security. No, they aren't. They only go to hospitals like everyone else. If it's an emergency, they will be treated, but that's it. So, the VA under Biden has been more productive than it has been in years, and Trump repeatedly tried to use the VA essentially as a slush fund to fund his other projects. That story about illegal immigrants being put up in hotels and veterans being kicked out is entirely fiction. Yes, all of those are true. It is, besides for the other things that Biden mentioned, specifically about the presidential rankings, Trump is quite universally by I'm not going to say everyone, but by the overwhelming majority of experts in the field, he is rated, if not the worst, then like bottom 2 or 3, right up there with, for example, Hoover with the Great Depression, and who was it? Goodness, before Lincoln, right before the Civil War, I can't recall his name right off the top of my head, but essentially the guy that completely messed up the prevention of the Civil War and did nothing as the South was leaning towards secession. So that's basically Trump's competition for worst president of all time. He's going to ignore the issue. That's what he's going to do. Childcare is very important. It is unbelievably expensive. People just can't afford it. Just like they can't afford their rent, or they can't afford their medical care, or anything like this. And it's because our salaries have not kept up with economic growth. Our salaries have not kept up with growth in productivity. And that's because lower regulation and lower anti-monopolistic practices have allowed larger and larger corporations to suck up more and more of the economy, reducing the level of competition, and basically allowing them to suppress the wages of workers for decades, making us unable to afford essentially anything. Now, as I said previously, the extended child care tax credit did help with a lot of this, but it was gotten rid of by Republicans, hopefully to be brought back, and it's still not even close to enough, unfortunately. I do admit that I believe in free childcare for everyone. There are no such people. Nonsense. So, I'm going to clarify this a little bit. The reason that Biden doesn't fire people is because he actually vetted them before he hired them, and the people around him are professionals who you might disagree with some of the things that they do, but they more or less do their jobs. And it's been very stable, and it's been effective, and it's been a well-managed executive branch in terms of the functions that the executive branch is supposed to carry out. Now, in Trump's administration, the reason that he kept cycling through and firing people is basically because he kept asking them to do crimes, and they'd go along with it, and then eventually he'd ask them to do something that they just couldn't do, and they left, and he found somebody who was willing to do a little bit more crimes, and then he keep asking them to do worse and worse stuff until eventually they hit their limit, and then he replaced them with someone even crazier, until you wind up with a 27-year-old golf caddy whose main job experience in the world is making nasty memes on social media, this Johnny McEntee guy, and he was put in charge of staffing at the White House, for God's sakes. Just like all of the insane other people that he was trying to bring in into the executive branch in and around January 6th. I mean, he wanted to make John Eastman a nobody environmental lawyer, like a real backbencher of the farthest back bench. He wanted to make this guy attorney general because he was willing to agree with Trump's lies about the 2020 election. And that's why Trump's entire administration was like a freaking merry-go-round of revolving doors. It was crazy. Let's not forget that Comey is probably, well, one of, let's say, the reasons why Trump won, because he revealed that the FBI was doing an investigation into Clinton. Unfortunately, he did not reveal that the FBI was also investigating Trump at the same time, and that the Clinton investigation ended up finding nothing for which to indict her. So, yeah. But of course, Comey did one favor for Trump, and he was unwilling to go as far as Trump wanted him to, which was to shut down any investigations into Trump and essentially swear his loyalty. And because Comey wouldn't do that, that's actually why Trump got rid of him. Again, contributed to largely by the fact that Trump didn't even negotiate with the Afghanistani government when he just decreed that all of our troops were to be removed, and created zero planning of any kind to actually facilitate that transition. Not allowed. The people on the border are just understaffed. They don't have enough Border Patrol agents. They don't have enough judges. They don't have enough caseworkers to process all of these people. And every time that more funding is asked for these programs, the Republicans are blocking it. A made-up number. Totally made up. They are not from prison. The entire population of South American prisons and mental wards and all of this does not equate to 18 million people. Not even close. Destroyed while we have the lowest unemployment rate in decades, the highest rate of infrastructure development in decades, largest manufacturing growth in decades, largest wage growth in decades. I mean, hell, even crime that they talk about all the time has dropped precipitously over the last 2 years. I mean, they're trying to paint a description of a country that just does not exist. They're trying to say that America is falling apart, and it's nonsense. I agree that it should not be a debate, that one of these people is a traitorous psychopath and the other one is a public servant, a well-meaning public servant who's reaching, let's say, the end of his shelf life, but again, not a psychopath. % in the last couple of weeks, and that was just from his executive action. Had they actually passed the Langford border bill, I mean, it had its own problems, but it would have gone at least some way to actually resolving the issue, but Trump doesn't want a solution. He wants the issue precisely for moments like this. They can't vote! And you see, this is something that is so hard to fight against, because Republicans, not just Trump, but Republicans for decades have been saying that, oh, Democrats are going to destroy the country. And now when Democrats come in and say, hey, there's actually a chance this guy might end democracy, it sounds like the boy who cried wolf, because then it's again just a case of he said, and how can people tell unless they've actually looked at the evidence? And that should be reminded, America is a great country, and no matter how hard it gets, we can do great things, and we can be even better. He's making things up. Other than cutting taxes for corporations, that was the main accomplishment, if you can call it that, of Trump's administration. Nothing else of real positive, that's not even positive, nothing else of any significance really was done. All of the other things that he even tried to do, like the Abraham Accords, bringing peace to the Middle East. Does the Middle East look peaceful? Because, of course, the guy, he didn't even bring in the Palestinians into the negotiation, just like he didn't bring in the Afghanis into his negotiation with the Taliban. He wants to talk to guys like the Taliban and Mohammed bin Salman, guys who are, to put it simply, psychopaths like him, people he can make an understanding with. And, of course, Trump's end result, the dividend of these negotiations, has been not peace in the Middle East, but $2 billion for Jared Kushner in Saudi money. Pure fiction. Pure fiction. So the Trump tax cuts actually expire on their own. The corporate tax drop is permanent, but the lower tax rate for us regular folks is temporary, and it was set to expire directly at the end of Trump's second term, because I assume at least when he started, he didn't intend to be, back when he was at the start of his administration, he didn't realize the situation he would be in today, and he probably did believe that he would just do his 2 terms and go. Now, of course, he has no choice but to stay in office forever, or else he's going to go to jail. But at least back then, he had set it up so that right as he was leaving, all of us get our taxes raised. But, his buddies in the corporations and the corporate world, they're still okay. Nope, they were just funneling money into stock buybacks. By the way, I want to clarify, the way that Trump is going to raise taxes on regular people, and actually his tax ideas are so regressive because what he wants to do, or at least has proposed doing, with Trump you never know, one of a million ideas that he might come up at any particular moment. But one of the things he proposed was, for example, replacing the income tax with broadly a sales tax on everything. And that specifically hits the lowest income people, because when you're a regular person, you spend most of your money on buying the things you need to live, as opposed to the very, very wealthy who can put their money into other things, invest it, hide it, squirrel it away, whatever, in ways that they can avoid that type of taxation. But the rest of us can't. So Trump's plans, if he actually enacted them, would be crushing for the regular average consumer. Not to mention, on top of that, putting tariffs on goods, along with that massive sales tax. It would be catastrophic. That's true. Yeah, so most of the really solid work on disentangling from China has been done in Biden's term, especially with the Chips and Sciences Act. You know, as I've been saying before, we might be at a real tipping point with our relationship with China because our economic growth outpaced theirs for the first time in decades. I want to keep this trend going. That's a lie. It's just a flat out lie. Flat out lie. So, I just want to clarify again, and this is something I'm going to do a video on, all of these claims about Biden taking money from foreign companies or foreign payments or what have you, no one has been able to show so much as a penny of foreign money going to Joe Biden in any unkosher way. His family, his relatives, may have some business dealings overseas that's not illegal, and they aren't members of his administration. Meanwhile, as I mentioned just previously, Jared Kushner, who got a job under Trump in his administration, who would not have passed the security clearances that he otherwise would have been required to have if he wasn't a Nepo baby and getting put in his position purely because of family connections. And he walked out like the second he leaves the presidency, he's got $2 billion from the Saudis. And that's, again, one example of many, including during his term. Trump made foreign nationals, when they came to visit him in the United States, they stayed at Trump hotels, paying money to his business. And even the Secret Service was staying in Trump-owned hotels, paying money to his business. The amount of money that Trump got from foreign companies directly to him, and as a result of actions he took as president, are tremendous. Not to mention the things that are happening afterwards. Let's not forget that one of the major investors in his Truth Social company is a guy named Jeff Yass, who is also a major investor in ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, which is basically a stand-in for the Chinese government. And if you would recall, not too long ago when they were planning a TikTok ban legislation, Trump, after having been for it for some time, suddenly turned against it. Maybe because Mr. Yass and his Chinese money was whispering in his ear. But, you know, of course he's going to go on about the Biden crime family, despite, again, zero evidence of this. So I will say this. It is true that Biden did not remove Trump's tariffs. And I'm of mixed mind about this. It's, like I said, tariffs have to be implemented skillfully and strategically. And what Biden has done, which Trump did not, is actually fill up the other side of that equation. He, with the Chips and Sciences Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, provided the incentive for domestic investment to actually take hold and make us competitive with cheaper priced Chinese goods. That's a lie. Nonsense. We're at our best point with China in a very long time. Nonsense. Nonsense. It was an exploding problem exponentially. And it continued. It was under Bush, it was under Obama, it was under Trump, and it's continuing under Biden. Nonsense. That he's saying that we had 3 years of better than any other country dealing with opioid dose deaths, which I guess would mean like 0. Nonsense. It was a catastrophe. The flow of fentanyl across the border was utterly unimpeded. In fact, searches and seizures are at their highest point now in quite a while. But regardless, that's not really the main point, because fentanyl doesn't mostly cross into the country that way. It's not, illegal immigrants smuggling it through, like in their backpacks or what have you, as they're going through the border. Very often, it goes through legal checkpoints, being smuggled by American citizens. And the reason for this is because, again, it's just a business decision from the point of view of the cartels. A kilo of fentanyl is worth tremendous money on the streets, $1 million easily if it's properly diluted. And you do not want to risk losing this product. Now, you can maybe pay a couple $100 to an illegal immigrant to try to carry it across. They're going to be found, they're going to be interdicted, they're going to be searched by Border Patrol, or you can pay a couple grand to an American with a U.S. passport who's going to go in legally through an airport or what have you, and going to get a lot less scrutiny, or they come in through container trucks or what have you, anything like this. It comes in a lot of times directly through our mail system, actually, because the stuff is so easy to conceal and so potent in such small amounts that is just not how you stop the flow, and it's certainly not how you stop this problem. Nonsense. He's making up all of this. So I'm actually going to disagree with both of them on this point, though at least, again, Biden isn't rampantly making stuff up. We're doing this entirely the wrong way. This is not how you fight the drug war. In fact, fighting the drug war is the problem. As long as we treat this as an issue of law enforcement as opposed to an issue of health, it's just going to keep on going, because the fact is there's too much money. There's just too much money involved. And until you cut the cartel's source of funding, they're just going to keep on doing what they're doing. And the only way to really stop this is to end criminalization, legalize and medicalize these drugs, so that if you're an addict, you don't go to jail, you go to the hospital. And that's just it. That is the solution. All of this, what we are doing right now, unless we target the demand for these drugs, and as long as people are still going to have to buy them off the street, the cartels are going to be there to supply them. So this kind of thing, there is a reporter held in Russian captivity, but everything Trump is saying about him is nonsense. These claims that he can mystically rescue these people, pull them out of imprisonment, or that he's going to make the claim that he's going to end the war in Ukraine in a day or whatever. It's nonsense. There is no way to do this. He cannot magic it out of his hat, nor is he proposing any sort of plan other than just, I'll negotiate, I'm a businessman, I'll negotiate. He's a businessman who every single business he ever ran went bankrupt, and that were loaded down with so much fraud. I mean, the guy never made deals, he just broke them. He was sued 4,000 times for basically, very often, non-payment. And the idea that this guy is some sort of master negotiator and that he's going to be able to get all the hostages released and end all the wars and all of this, it's fiction. It's purely made up. And the fact that he's never even asked, like, how? It's ridiculous. Sure. With a wand. Ridiculous. So again, this is a lie. Trump did not get 58 people out. I believe there were in total during his administration 4, maybe 5 hostage releases, and he didn't do it for free either. He paid money, he released our prisoners that we held. He's just making it up. No, he didn't. That was a long time ago. Again, all good points, if only he didn't answer a question about his age with the most raspy old man voice that's possible. Yep, that's what I was saying. Yeah, let's not forget the amount of times that Trump has just gone on and on about his deep affection for the greatest murderers on the face of the earth, including Kim Jong-un. Yeah, so those cognitive tests actually were tests for dementia. So when he aced them, basically he proved, and again, several years ago now, that he's not a vegetable, essentially. That's it. So Trump famously cheats at golf. He has been filmed cheating at golf repeatedly. He only plays on his own courses where he controls the game. He's known to have given himself a juiced-up golf cart so that he can go a little faster and get to where the ball is before everyone else. Like, it's literally that pathetic. He won't even play at a court that at a golfing field. I don't play golf, so I don't know the terms. But a golf course, yes, there it is. He won't even play at a golf course that he doesn't control. However, the fact that this is where we are, and a presidential debate is getting into fricking golf, is kind of sad. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dr. Ronnie Jackson, Dr. Feelgood, who is loading up the White House with all sorts of drugs. Again, these are tests for people suffering for dementia. If these doctors have never seen anyone ace these tests, that means that everyone they've come in contact with has dementia. It's nonsense. Now, you see, this is... Thank you for making that joke, President Biden. I appreciate it, because the way Trump is so obsessed with his own inadequacies as a man, like, you should see these trading cards that he sells for, I don't know, $100 a pop, showing him ripping his chest open like Superman, and you got all the muscles. I'm like, come on, man. Not to mention the freaking orange face and the hair and the whole thing. The amount of effort that this guy goes through to make himself look like he's not a degenerate toad. I mean, it's silly. Oh, this is so silly. I mean, these two guys. Oh my god. And then he's going to go and give a rally, and he's going to tell all of his supporters that it's time to fight for our country, and if you don't fight, it's going to be over, and that's it, and we need to have a Second Amendment solution to these political problems. Like, it's, you know, let's put it this way. The best judge of what a person's going to do is what they've already done. And this guy has never acquiesced to a loss. Not just in the 2020 election, but in 2016 when he lost the first Republican primary to Ted Cruz. He said there was fraud there too, because he can never admit that he was ever wrong or he ever lost anything, because he has the emotional maturity of a 4-year-old. Oh yeah, his wonderful statements that he took hours to make, and calling those rioters who broke into the Capitol, who assaulted police, put 140 of them in jail, calling them wonderful people and saying, I love you so much. I mean, and now, of course, promising to pardon all of them. You know, again, it's not what the guy says, it's what he does. And at every point, he has encouraged and enabled and covered for the people who are willing to do violence on his behalf. Nonsense. There is video all over YouTube, you can watch it from the January 6 hearings, of how, I mean, it was a brutal fight. These cops were holding the line. Now, I will say that there were times where, if the cops saw that there was a line that they could, the January 6th, the Capitol Police, all of them, if those police officers saw a situation where they could not hold the line, they practiced some really, really highly skilled crowd control to try to get this angry mob going in the direction where they could better control it. And it was really tremendous work and tremendous professionalism on behalf of these officers that saved the day, not anything that Trump did. Nonsense! He's, again, I want to say, does anyone believe that Nancy Pelosi really on video admitted to responsibility for January 6th? But some people are going to believe it, even though it's nonsense. I know the video that he's referring to where she's being filmed by her daughter, and that is not what happened at all. She's very clearly begging the National Guard for help, anybody for help, and being told essentially that they can't do anything because she doesn't have the authority to give them that order. And the guy who is responsible, the guy who's doing this, he has not given the order for anyone to move. Biden did not indict him. Trump was indicted in multiple jurisdictions. Some were by the Federal Department of Justice, though that was through the Office of an Independent Special Counsel. A lot of it was through various state procedures and state actors that are, again, totally unrelated to the federal government. But let's not forget that at the end of the day, Trump is indicted by a grand jury, and more importantly, convicted by a jury. And that's a jury that's going to be made up of just, his fellow citizens. And he's going to have a chance, as he has had in his trial that has already concluded, he's going to have a chance to voir dire these jurors, which is the process by which you weed out anybody who might have a bias or anything like that. And he's getting the same process as anyone else. And the reason why Trump is, why he has already been found guilty, and why I believe he will be found guilty in the other cases as well, is because the evidence against him is just absolutely overwhelming. Though I will say this, he is making a good rhetorical stance here, like trying to show himself as the better man, that I'm the one that's actually so disappointed that Joe Biden can't do the job. In reality, it's nonsense. This is not a guy who cares about the best interests of the country in any way. The only reason you're here is because if you don't get elected, you will die in jail. By the way, no actual plans for how they're going to make America great again, except cut all the taxes for the billionaires, deregulate everything, and round up every brown, gay, trans person, essentially, and kick them out over the border. Failing nation with the world's greatest and most dynamic economy, the most powerful military. Nonsense. Nonsense. The fact is that Trump has made it clear repeatedly that he is a friend to all those people that he mentioned. Now, Biden, in his foreign policy, I don't believe he's as strong as he should be in certain areas, but at the very least, he is responsible. And he's been able to strengthen our alliances in a way that we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War. And at the very least, even if I don't agree with all of his judgments, at least he has a basic understanding of how foreign policy works. And Trump just makes all this stuff up. He is actually contributing to the foreign policy agenda of Russia and China and whatnot, because all of that threatening the World War III, they're going to drop some nukes, that's a part of Chinese and Russian propaganda, because they want the West to see itself as weak. They want the citizens of Western democracies to be afraid of China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, so that when they do something, we don't react. Because if we did react, we would crush them. For example, Putin, the reason why he relies so often on terror tactics and on nuclear intimidation is because he understands that in a conventional war, he would be annihilated. So what he wants to do is scare the pants off of the citizens of Germany, France, the United States, all of that, and hope that they restrain their political leaders. But in reality, there's not going to be a World War III, at least not at this point. not with the geopolitical situation as it is now, and not with Biden remaining in office. Because the fact is that China doesn't have the balls for it yet, and if Putin actually did decide to try to launch a nuclear weapon, he already understands, and at the very least, certainly the people around him and the people who would be enacting that order understand that it would be a death sentence. That once you have a nuke, once you actually launch it, then the one thing that's going to be able to scare the people of the West enough to actually get them to do something, instead of scaring them into inaction, and that would destroy all of his plans. And this is, by the way, another really important point that many people fail to understand, and that stuff that happens across the world affects us over here. And we don't really have a choice to kind of lift up our hands and say, like, oh, I'm out of this. We can't do that. So he, of course, is not answering the question. So Putin was acting quite brazenly in Africa and in the Middle East, and he was preparing for this war in Ukraine for a very long time, which Trump did nothing to deter. However, I actually do believe, and this is a little pet theory I have, that actually, had Trump been re-elected, Putin might have waited until Trump finished pulling the US out of NATO. Because if that had occurred, then Ukraine would have been an even easier target. However, Putin was planning this invasion for a long time, and very often we tend to assume, as I've said before, that the president can kind of control everything, but he doesn't. There were factors inside of Russia that made Putin decide on this timing, essentially, to continue his attack on Ukraine. And that's because very often in Putin's time as the leader of Russia, or even the de facto leader when he wasn't president, he used foreign excursions as a way to undercut political instability at home. Whenever there was some sort of agitation, or maybe the people wanted a little bit more of their rights back and complaining about, hey, why we had the same guy for so long, maybe we should have some new elections and whatnot, Putin says, okay, let's have another war. And that is essentially what he has been doing for a long time. Though, of course, that's not the only reason. He also has, like, genuine plans for an expanded Russian Empire, regardless of what's going on at home. And it's pretty scary. Again, he took nothing from Trump, at least in Ukraine, because he assumed that Trump would arrange for him to get it willingly, with no resistance. Or at least with less resistance. No, he's not. Putin is not going to succeed in taking Ukraine. The fact is, even if the US pulls out, the Ukrainian people, armed with the aid of Europe, and perhaps, frankly, even without it, they wouldn't stop fighting. Because the second you see in person what the Russians leave behind everywhere they go, you realize you don't have a choice. And that's why the people of Ukraine, even though Putin was saying that the war would be over in 5 days, that's why they're still fighting. Yeah, it's because they got help, but it's also because They're stubborn and they're brave, and they should be commended for that. Moreover, we are actually in a very advantageous position against Russia because their entire military capacity is being degraded without a single American soldier in a position of danger. And that's tremendous. And the cost of it is a pittance compared to what we were spending just to be prepared for the threat of a Russian attack. Again, not because of the psychopathic dictator who bombed them all to pieces and destroyed half the country. It's not his fault, because of course, you know, he's Trump's buddy. Yeah. Which means no. Because there is no way that you can convince these people that it was fair. He had 60 some odd court cases to do it. He was told again and again and again it was fair, including by practically everyone in his administration, but it doesn't matter. There's no fraud. He has done this exact thing so many times. Like, in a week we'll have a news conference, I'll tell you all about it, we're going to drop the information. And even a lot of his cronies have started picking up this habit. Republican congressman, freaking Mike Lindell, the pillow guy. Every day there's a new, next week we'll have the big revelation, we'll have the big conference, you'll see it all. Never happens, not once. Sure he will. Nonsense. Jail? Only within the Republican Party, only within the core base of the Republican Party, among people who would have voted for him anyway. Yep. 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 Now, I actually disagree with this framing that something snapped in Trump when he lost, because he's always been this way. That's just his character. That is who he is. He would never have accepted defeat, because his ego couldn't cope with it. And it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time that he behaved this way. It's not a change. But I understand how some people might see it that way. Alright, let's fast forward to the BS. You see, he had real trouble getting those words out there. Yeah, so by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, Medicare literally could not negotiate with drug companies for the prices of several of these medications so they could charge essentially whatever the hell they want. It's insane, and thankfully someone's done something about it. That's an interesting thing. Says the guy who had the least productive administration, certainly within living memory, in terms of just the actual, not even bills that they passed, but bills that they proposed. There was nothing. Like, this is the guy who did Infrastructure Week every week for God knows how long, flipping through blank documents. Like, he has no ideas. And he doesn't understand what it requires to actually do this job. Biden, and that's kind of the difficult thing, he's certainly not at the height of his powers, but at least he understands the job. Whereas this guy doesn't get it at all. Again, he just goes back to the same lies. Nonsense. They were still funding Hezbollah, they were still funding all that, we were still... did he just say that we cut off all trade with China? Like, anyone that was funding any of these groups? I mean, crazy stuff. No, it's not. It's a handful... Like, the amount of crazy media coverage that these students have been getting, and I'm not saying it's a non-issue, but compared to, like, literal neo-Nazis in the streets, and not to mention the level of support that those neo-Nazis were getting from the highest levels of government, it's a completely different situation than what we have today. With the, I will admit that a lot of the pro-Palestinian, I guess you could say protesters / in some areas rioters, they have been getting into some really crazy ideological territory. A lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of scary stuff, but they don't have any power in the Democratic Party. They've largely been purged. I mean, just recently, Jamal Bowman, who is one of the more lefty ends of the spectrum in terms of the Democratic Party, he lost his primary to a very kind of centrist conservative, highly pro-Israel Democrat in his district. Biden has been very pro-Israel the entire time. The entire infrastructure of the Democratic Party has absolutely not in any way given in to the crazies, to the pro-Hamas brand of protesters. Though there are many people with legitimate concerns about the human rights situation going on among the Palestinians in Gaza. It is bad. And a lot of the people in Netanyahu's government are scary, crazy people. Now, that is a completely different situation from the President of the United States actively telling people like that, the neo-Nazi rioters at Charlottesville and other places, that they're wonderful people, stand back and stand by. I mean, that's nuts. The amount of juice that he put on those movements. Trump was the one who put the Proud Boys and all of them on the map. He gave them credibility and allowed them to expand their circles of recruitment, and he is one of the main enablers of them and their activities today. Comparing that to the Democratic Party and some of the few far fringes of lefty ideology that again has no power or hold on power whatsoever, it's nuts. Trump is laughed at universally, including by the people he thinks are his friends. Like, every single person who's ever been close to him and then left his orbit, the previous people in his administration, and of course any foreign leader who's not a dictator, basically, has come out saying that this guy is a buffoon of unparalleled proportions. So, again, it's a lie. The majority of the money that was kind of released by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act into the hands of these corporations was kept in the hands of these corporations through stock buybacks and dividends and whatnot, just putting the money all back to the richest people who already had the most. Very, very little of it was spent towards actual job creation. And again, you can plot this on a graph. You can look at the timeline, look at job creation over time, compare when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act happened, see what changed, and then we can see after Biden is passing his bills what changed. And it is very clear what the causative factor is, and it's not Trump's tax cuts. That is true. No one's ever seen a president pull off, well, almost pull off a coup on TV. No one's ever seen that before. No one's ever seen anyone in his position talk about injecting bleach or literally pretending that the COVID pandemic was not a thing while it was killing thousands and hundred thousands of people. It's crazy. Like, he's making this up. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know if he knows what he's talking about. But because he says it loudly and confidently, he sounds 1,000 times better than Biden to the uninformed ear. Again, so that choice thing, it was passed by Obama and has, unfortunately, plenty of problems. No, he didn't. Okay, so I have zero interest in their analysis, but I hope you'll have interest in mine. And that's why what I'm going to do is make a separate video from all of this, going into my thoughts now that the debate is over. And let's just say I got a lot of thoughts. Alright, see you soon, everyone.